The Lewd Spectre, Haunting History. An autopsy of King Ferdinand VII's depraved mind. Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a place of suffocating silks and whispered poisons to the royal palace of Madrid in the late 18th century. You're standing in a long, cold hall of mirrors where every surface reflects not just the candlelight, but the ambition and decay behind the eyes of every courtier. The air is thick with the scent of orange blossoms from the gardens and the faintest, sourest hint of fear. We are here to witness the birth of a monster, a king so disastrous he would shatter an empire. This isn't a fairy tale about a noble prince. It's a political autopsy. You probably won't survive the sheer backstabbing incompetence of this royal court with your faith in monarchy intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the Spain of the 1780s, a kingdom that feels like a magnificent aging galleon, still impressive, but groaning under the weight of its own golden history. It's a nation caught between the rigid traditions of the past and the terrifying revolutionary ideas seeping in from France. And at the helm, you have the royal family, a group of people less equipped to steer this vessel than a child with a toy boat in a bathtub. Your king is Charles IV. Picture a man who is by all accounts genuinely kind. He is gentle, pious, and possesses a simple, uncomplicated goodness. Unfortunately, the qualities that make a man a pleasant neighbor are not the same ones that make him an effective monarch of a global empire. You see him now walking through the palace corridors, his mind not on statecraft or colonial policy, but on his two true passions, hunting and clockmaking. He can spend hours, days, even disassembling and reassembling intricate timepieces, his large, gentle hands surprisingly nimble. He finds more solace in the predictable logic of gears and springs than in the messy, illogical demands of his people. He adores his wife, the Queen, with a devotion that is as absolute as it is frankly blind. He trusts her completely, which in this court is like leaving a lamb to guard the wolves. He is a good man, but a weak king, a placeholder in a crown too heavy for his head. And everyone from the highest grandee to the lowest kitchen servant knows it. The real power in the palace doesn't sit on the throne, it stands beside it. You now turn your gaze to Queen Maria Louisa of Parma. She is a whirlwind of energy, intelligence, and voracious ambition. Where Charles is passive, she is proactive. Where he is simple, she is a labyrinth of political calculation. She wears the finest silks, her powdered hair adorned with jewels that catch the light. But her most formidable feature is her eyes, sharp, assessing, and rarely still. She feels the weight of her duty to the Bourbon dynasty, a duty that in her mind has one primary objective: producing a healthy male heir to secure the line. This is a source of constant, gnawing anxiety for her. You must understand, the royal nursery has been a place of immense sorrow. Maria Louisa has endured numerous pregnancies, a grueling physical toll in any era, but especially in the 18th century. More often than not, these pregnancies have ended in miscarriages, stillbirths, or infants who survive only a few weeks or years. Each tiny coffin is another crack in the foundation of the dynasty, another whisper in the court that the royal bloodline might be cursed or weak. The pressure is immense, a physical and political weight she carries every single day. And into this pressurized environment, a new figure has recently made his grand entrance, a man who will become the pivot around which the entire court, and indeed the fate of Spain, will turn. His name is Manuel Godoy. You see him not yet the all-powerful prime minister he will become, but already a man of consequence. He is young, handsome, and rose from the humble ranks of the royal guard with a speed that has left the old nobility dizzy and resentful. He charmed the queen and through her the king. He's intelligent, certainly, but his greatest skill is his ability to mirror the desires of his patrons. To Maria Luisa, he is a confidant, a political instrument, and the whispers say much, much more. To Charles, he is a loyal friend and a capable administrator who handles the boring state business that the king so dislikes. Not exactly a dynamic that the royal HR department would approve of. The rumors of an affair between the Queen and Godoy are not just whispers, they are the background noise of the court, the unspoken assumption in every political maneuver. It is into this toxic triangle of a well-meaning but oblivious husband, a powerful and possibly unfaithful wife, and her ambitious young favorite that a new life is about to enter. It is the autumn of 1784. On October the 14th, after a tense and difficult labor, Queen Maria Luisa gives birth to a son. He is healthy, he is strong. He is named Ferdinand. A wave of relief washes over the kingdom. Bells are rung, cannons are fired, and prayers of thanks are offered. An heir is born. The succession is secure. But as you look closer, past the formal celebrations and the stiff court etiquette, you can feel the undercurrents of doubt. In the shadowed corners of the palace, the question is already being asked, albeit in the quietest of tones, whose son is he? This is a question that has never been definitively answered. Historians still argue whether Charles IV was truly the biological father of Ferdinand and some of his other siblings. The timing of Godoy's ascent and the Queen's subsequent successful pregnancies is, to say the least, suspicious. Charles IV, in his trusting nature, never publicly questioned the legitimacy of his children. He accepted Ferdinand as his son and heir without reservation. But the doubt lingered, a poison dripped into the royal cradle from the moment of birth. It would colour Ferdinand's entire existence, a stain of potential illegitimacy that would feed his insecurities and his resentments for the rest of his life. You can almost feel it settling upon the infant, this invisible burden of whispers and sideways glances. Now let's pause and look at a famous portrait of this family painted years later by the master Francisco Goya. This isn't just a quirky tidbit, it's a psychological diagnosis on canvas. Goya had an uncanny ability to paint not just the faces but the souls of his subjects. In his masterpiece, The Family of Charles IV, you see them all lined up in their formal finery. The king looks pleasant but vacant, but the Queen Maria Luisa stands in the center staring directly at you, proud, dominant, her hand possessively on her daughter's shoulder. And look at the future king, the young Ferdinand, off to the side. His expression is sullen, mistrustful, a potent mix of arrogance and insecurity. Goya has captured the entire dysfunctional dynamic, the weak patriarch, the commanding matriarch, and the resentful heir stewing in the shadows. He painted the truth, and somehow they never even noticed. Back in the nursery, the infant Ferdinand is swaddled in the finest linens, attended by a small army of wet nurses, ladies-in-waiting, and physicians. He has everything a child could materially want. But the two people who matter most are phantoms in his life. His father, Charles, visits when required, a large, warm presence, who likely coos at him for a moment before his mind wanders back to a particularly tricky clock escapement he's working on. His mother, Maria Luisa, is a more frequent but far more complicated presence. Her attention is divided 1,000 ways between matters of state, her social obligations, and increasingly her relationship with Godoy. Ferdinand is not being raised by parents, he is being managed by the state. His feeding times, his sleeping hours, his first words, they are all matters of public record and political importance, but they lack the genuine unconditional warmth of a loving home. Affection, he will learn early on, is not a given. It is a tool. A smile from his mother might mean approval, but it might also be a prelude to a political lecture. A gift from his father is a kind gesture, but it lacks deep connection. He is the Prince of Asturias, the future King of Spain and the Indies. But he is also just a baby alone in a vast cold palace surrounded by people who see him not as a son, but as a symbol, a pawn. You can sense the foundations of his personality being laid right here in this opulent but emotionally barren nursery. He is the hope of the nation, but he is unloved in a fundamental way. He is the heir to an absolute monarchy, but he is powerless in his own home, utterly dependent on a mother he will grow to resent, and a man Godoy whom he will come to see as the usurper of his father's throne and his mother's affection. This isn't a simple childhood dislike. It is the genesis of a pathological hatred that will drive him for decades. The air in the palace is thick with intrigue. Every promotion, every new tapestry, every royal decree is scrutinized for the hidden hand of Godoy. The old aristocratic families who can trace their lineage back for centuries are horrified that this upstart, this nobody holds more power than all of them combined. They see Ferdinand as their potential savior. They begin to whisper in his ear as he grows from an infant to a toddler, planting the seeds of suspicion against his own mother and her favorite. They tell him that he is the true hope of Spain, that he must be strong, that he must be wary. They are grooming him not just to be a king, but to be a weapon against the current regime, a regime run by his own parents. Imagine the confusion for a small child. He is taught to honor his father and mother as church and state demand. Yet the people who flatter him, who treat him as the center of the universe, are the same people who imply his mother is an adulteress and his father a fool. He is being raised in a world of profound hypocrisy, where the public face of the happy, pious royal family bears no resemblance to the private reality of dysfunction and betrayal. He learns that words are meaningless, that loyalty is temporary, and that power is the only thing that truly matters. You watch him in his cradle. The future of Spain, of Mexico, of Peru, of the Philippines, all rests on the tiny, fragile heartbeat in this room. The seeds of civil wars, of revolutions, of a national trauma that will echo for 200 years are being sown right here. They are in the Queen's divided affections, in the King's benign neglect, in Godoy's ambition, and in the bitter resentments of the slighted nobility. Ferdinand is the vessel for all this poison. He is absorbing it through the very air he breathes. The lewd spectre that will one day haunt the history of Spain is not yet a spectre. It is a baby crying in a gilded crib, utterly alone. And as you fade from the room, leaving the infant prince to the silence and the shadows, you know that the stage has been perfectly set for a tragedy of epic proportions. The cradle is poisoned, and the child within it has no chance at all. Section 2. The years peel away like layers of gilded wallpaper in a damp palace. The infant you left in that poisoned cradle is now a boy, then a young man, walking the cold marble floors of the Escorial Palace. You watch him grow, and it's a strange, stunted kind of growth, like a tree twisted by a relentless wind. He is the Prince of Asturias, the heir to the throne. But his world is a cage, not a cage of iron bars, but one of etiquette, isolation, and suffocating suspicion. His daily routine is a rigid performance. There is a specific time to wake, to pray, to eat, to study, to be presented. Even his playtime is a semi-public spectacle. Imagine being a child whose every tantrum, whose every scraped knee is a matter of court gossip, a data point for ambitious nobles to analyze. This isn't a childhood, it's an apprenticeship in paranoia. His parents remain distant monumental figures like the grand statues in the palace gardens. You see his father, King Charles, returning from a hunt, smelling of leather and the outdoors, his face ruddy and smiling. He claps his son on the shoulder, asks a perfunctory question about his studies, and then his attention is gone, drifting back to a prized hunting dog or a new rifle he's acquired. The connection is fleeting, a spark that never catches fire. Then there is his mother, Queen Maria Louisa. She sees him more often, but her gaze is evaluative. She is assessing him, his posture, his piety, his progress. Her love is conditional, tangled up in her ambitions for the dynasty and her own political survival. It is not the soft, comforting presence a child needs, but the sharp, demanding oversight of a project manager. As Ferdinand grows, so does the power of the man he despises. Manuel Godoy is no longer just the Queen's favorite, he is the sun around which the Spanish court now orbits. He is made Prime Minister. He is given titles, estates, and a wealth that rivals the king's. After a brief, relatively successful war with revolutionary France, he is gifted the absurdly grand title of Prince of the Peace. This is a shocking break with tradition. In Spain, the only person aside from the heir to hold the title of prince was nobody. It was unheard of. The old aristocratic families, the dukes and counts, whose ancestors had fought the Moors, are utterly scandalized. This former guardsman, this upstart, is now a prince. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and it makes them choke with rage. And where does all that rage go? It finds a natural vessel. You see them, these disgruntled grandees, bowing low to the young Prince Ferdinand. In his apartments, away from the watchful eyes of the Queen, they cultivate a shadow court. They flatter him, they defer to him, they whisper poison into his ear. They tell him that Godoy is destroying Spain. They hint that Godoy has bewitched his parents. They tell Ferdinand that he and he alone is the true hope for the kingdom's salvation. They water the seeds of resentment that were planted in his cradle, and they find the most fertile soil imaginable. The key figure in this process, the chief gardener of Ferdinand's hatred, is his tutor, a man named Juan de Escóiquiz. Escóiquiz is a canon, a man of the cloth, with a mind as sharp and twisted as a corkscrew. He is put in charge of the prince's education, and he understands that knowledge is power. But the knowledge he imparts to Ferdinand is a warped, curated version of reality. He teaches him history not as a series of complex events, but as a simple morality play of good kings and the wicked, ambitious ministers who lead them astray. The lesson is clear: your father is a good king, but he is being led astray by a wicked minister. Guess who? Escóiquiz becomes more than a tutor. He is Ferdinand's only confidant, his strategist, his entire world. He nurtures the boy's natural intelligence, but channels it exclusively into cunning and deceit. He praises his stubbornness, reframing it as princely resolve. He validates his paranoia, telling him it is merely royal prudence. Historians still argue whether Escóiquiz was a master manipulator using the prince to achieve his own ambitions, or a misguided ideologue who genuinely believed he was saving the monarchy from Godoy's corrupting influence. Whatever his motives, the result is the same. He forges Ferdinand into a weapon aimed directly at the heart of his own family's court. You can sit in on one of their lessons. The room is dark, filled with heavy books and maps. Escóiquiz is reading from a text, his voice a low, persuasive hum. He is teaching Ferdinand about King Philip III, another Spanish monarch known for his piety and his reliance on a powerful chief minister, the Duke of Lerma. Escóiquiz paints Lerma as a villain who enriched himself at the kingdom's expense while the good king was distracted. He doesn't need to draw the parallel for Ferdinand. The boy sits there, his large Bourbon jaw set, his eyes dark with understanding. Every history lesson is a lesson about his own life. Every historical villain wears the face of Manuel Godoy. This is a masterful campaign of psychological conditioning, and it is working perfectly. Outside the classroom, Ferdinand's life is one of simmering rage and petty cruelty. Lacking any real power, he exercises it in small, unpleasant ways. He is dismissive to servants, unkind to animals. He learns to wear a mask of dull-witted compliance in front of his parents, especially his mother. He perfects a sullen, vacant expression that leads them to underestimate him, to see him as a brooding but harmless boy. They have no idea that behind those dull eyes, a sharp and vengeful mind is taking notes, cataloguing every perceived slight, every honor given to Godoy that he feels was stolen from him. Every time he sees his mother laugh with the Prince of the Peace, every time he hears his father praise the man's administrative skills, the hatred hardens into something cold and solid in his chest. Let's talk about the specific nature of his paranoia. It isn't just a vague feeling of being watched. It's a conviction. He comes to believe that Godoy is actively trying to kill him, or at the very least usurp his place as heir. He suspects the food he's given might be poisoned. He sees conspiracies in every corner. When his first bride is chosen for him, he is immediately convinced that she is a spy for Godoy and his mother. This isn't politics anymore. This is a deep-seated psychological disturbance nurtured in the unique greenhouse of the Spanish court. He trusts no one but the small circle of sycophants curated for him by Escóiquiz. They are his echo chamber, confirming his every suspicion and applauding his every resentful thought. Now imagine the sheer awkwardness of the family dinners. You are seated at the long, polished table in the royal palace. The food is exquisite, the silver gleams, but the tension is so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. There's King Charles trying to make pleasant conversation about the day's hunt. There's Queen Maria Luisa talking animatedly with Godoy, who is of course seated in a place of high honor. And there is Ferdinand the Prince, silent, pushing his food around his plate, his eyes flicking from Godoy to his mother and back again. He radiates a palpable aura of contempt. It's the most uncomfortable dinner party in Europe, and it happens every single night. The family is completely fractured, split into two warring camps living under the same roof. The palace is no longer a home, it's a cold war zone. A particularly strange detail of Ferdinand's upbringing was the obsession with his physical health, which was of course tied to the health of the dynasty. Physicians would monitor and document his every bodily function with a level of detail that would make a modern celebrity blush. His height, his weight, his appetite, even the regularity of his digestion were matters of state. This constant invasive scrutiny over his physical body likely did little to foster a healthy sense of self, adding another layer of pressure and paranoia to his existence. He wasn't a person. He was a dynastic asset, a prize bull to be monitored and measured. When you are treated like an object your entire life, it's perhaps no surprise you learn to see other people as objects too. So as you watch him reach his late teens and early 20s, you see the final product of this poisonous education. He is physically imposing with the prominent nose and jaw of his Bourbon ancestors. But his expression is guarded, his mannerisms coarse. He lacks the refined charm you might expect of a prince. He prefers crude jokes and the company of rough, uneducated people who flatter him over the sophisticated banter of the enlightened nobility. He is in essence a man who has been taught to hate everything. His parents' court represents the art, the Enlightenment ideals, the French-influenced manners, and above all the meritocratic rise of a man like Godoy. He is a reactionary in waiting. His entire identity has been forged in opposition. He doesn't know what he stands for, only what he stands against. And all the while, Godoy's shadow only grows longer. He signs treaties, commands armies, and effectively runs the country. To the outside world and to his trusting parents, he is the indispensable man holding Spain together. But to Ferdinand and his circle, he is a cancer, a usurper, the source of every problem, both personal and national. They blame him for military defeats. They blame him for economic hardships. They blame him for the alliances he makes. He becomes a scapegoat for everything, a simple answer to every complex problem. You see Ferdinand now standing before a mirror. He is no longer a boy. He is a man, the Prince of Asturias. He straightens his uniform and looks at his own reflection. But the face he sees is a mask. Behind it, the machinery of conspiracy is turning, oiled by years of resentment and expertly guided by escoiquiz. He is the son of a rival solar system, a center of gravity for every alienated noble, every disgruntled cleric, every citizen who feels that Spain has lost its way. He is done waiting in the shadows. He is ready to act. He believes it is his destiny, his sacred duty, to tear down the man who has haunted his entire life. He is ready to plot against the Prince of the Peace. And in doing so, he is ready to plot against his own mother and his own king. The year is now 1807. The air in Spain feels different, charged with a nervous energy. Across the Pyrenees, Napoleon Bonaparte has been reshaping the map of Europe with his armies, and Spain is uncomfortably tethered to his ambitions. The alliance with France, engineered by Godoy, is deeply unpopular. Spanish sailors died for France at the Battle of Trafalgar, and now French troops are marching through Spain, supposedly on their way to invade Portugal. But their presence feels like an occupation. The Spanish people are restless. They mutter against the French, and they mutter even louder against the man who invited them in, Manuel Godoy, the Prince of the Peace. This simmering public anger is the perfect political weather for a conspiracy. And you are about to become a part of it. You find yourself in the prince's private apartments, deep within the monolithic granite walls of the El Escorial Palace. Remember this place, this vast, imposing structure that is part monastery, part palace, part tomb. Its sheer size and complexity, with its endless corridors and hidden courtyards, make it the perfect setting for secrets. The room is opulent, but the atmosphere is closer to a smoky back room than a royal salon. Here, in the flickering candlelight, is the heart of the rebellion. There is Ferdinand, his face pale and set, looking older than his 23 years, and beside him always is his mentor Escoiquiz, his clerical robes doing little to hide the sharp mind of a political schemer. Around them are a handful of Spain's most powerful noblesmen, like the Duke of Infantado, who feel their ancient rights have been trampled by the upstart Godoy. Their plan is a messy cocktail of desperation and amateur treason. The primary goal is to get rid of Godoy. They are compiling a dossier, a collection of real and imagined crimes, to expose his corruption and, most scandalously, his intimate relationship with the Queen. They are also secretly printing and distributing vicious propaganda pamphlets that paint Godoy as a lecherous monster and Ferdinand as the pure, pious prince who will save Spain. Their ultimate goal, however, is the throne itself. They are drafting letters and decrees that would, upon the king's death, a death they seem to be eagerly anticipating, give Ferdinand immediate control and sideline his mother completely. It's less of a surgical coup and more of a frantic scramble for power. But their most audacious and dangerous move is to go over the heads of the entire Spanish government. Guided by Escoy Quiz, Ferdinand makes a decision that is an undeniable act of treason. He decides to write directly to the master of Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. You watch as he hunches over a desk, a quill scratching nervously across the paper. He writes to the emperor as an equal, a fellow sovereign trapped by wicked advisors. He complains bitterly about Godoy, pleads for Napoleon's protection, and makes a stunning proposal. He asks for the hand of a Bonaparte princess in marriage. He wants to personally tie himself and Spain to Napoleon's new dynasty, creating an alliance that would completely bypass his father, the king. He is in effect asking a foreign ruler to help him overthrow his own family's government. It's a breathtaking betrayal, born of equal parts ambition and fear. Historians still argue whether Napoleon ever took this offer seriously. Was he genuinely considering propping up Ferdinand, or was he just enjoying the spectacle of the Spanish Bourbons tearing each other apart? The French emperor was a master of playing all sides. He received Ferdinand's secret letters, sent back vague, encouraging replies, and simply watched, letting the rot in the Spanish court deepen. He didn't need to invade a country that was so willing to destroy itself from within. For weeks, the conspiracy breathes in the stale, secret air of the palace. Ferdinand and his followers feel clever hidden. They don't realize that Godoy, a man who survived for decades at the pinnacle of power, has instincts as sharp as a feral cat. He senses the shift in the political currents. He hears the whispers. He intercepts a coded message. He grows suspicious of Ferdinand's constant letter writing. He goes to the king and queen and warns them that their own son is plotting against them. Now you are standing in the corridor outside Ferdinand's rooms on the evening of October 27th, 1807. The air is suddenly electric with tension. King Charles IV himself, his face a mask of sorrow and rage, strides down the hall. This is highly unusual. The king, who normally lets others handle such unpleasantries, is here to confront his son personally. He bursts into Ferdinand's chambers. Ferdinand is stunned, caught completely off guard. The king, his voice trembling with a rare display of authority, demands to see the papers on his son's desk. Panicked, Ferdinand refuses. But the king insists, and the search begins. It doesn't take long. They find everything. The drafts of the decrees to be issued after the king's death. The vitriolic manuscript attacking the queen. And worst of all, the secret correspondence with Napoleon. The evidence is absolute, damning, and irrefutable. Ferdinand, the heir to the throne, is a traitor. And here, in this moment of crisis, you see the true nature of the man. The arrogant prince, the supposed savior of Spain, vanishes. In his place is a terrified, whimpering coward. He doesn't stand up for his beliefs. He doesn't defend his co-conspirators. He utterly collapses. He falls to his knees before his father, weeping, begging, pleading for forgiveness. The king, heartbroken, places his son under arrest in his own rooms with guards posted at the door. The next day, the king makes the affair public. He issues a royal decree to the nation explaining his most painful grief at discovering a most unheard-of conspiracy in his own palace, led by his own son and heir. The news spreads through Madrid like wildfire. The conspirators are rounded up and thrown in prison. Ferdinand, alone and terrified, is subjected to interrogation. His resolve, if it ever existed, lasts for about 5 minutes. He proceeds to betray everyone who ever trusted him. He writes out a full, detailed confession, naming every single person involved in the plot, from the Duke of Infantado down to the most minor courtier. He throws them all under the carriage without a second thought to save his own skin. It is a spectacular display of disloyalty. But then something strange happens. The public reaction is not what the king and Godoy expected. The people of Madrid don't see Ferdinand as a traitor. They have been fed a steady diet of anti-Godoy propaganda for years. They see the story exactly as Ferdinand's party would have wished. The good noble prince has tried to save Spain from the clutches of the wicked favourite, and now the queen and her lover are persecuting him for it. Crowds gather in the streets not to condemn the prince, but to murmur their support for him. Faced with this unexpected wave of popular support for his treacherous son, and horrified at the prospect of putting the heir to the throne on trial for treason, a scandal that would shake the monarchy to its foundations, King Charles hesitates. His fatherly indulgence, his weakness wins out over his kingly duty. He decides to forgive. But first, he demands a public display of contrition, and Ferdinand, the great survivor, delivers a performance worthy of the stage. He writes a series of grovelling letters to his father and mother. You can almost see him, pen in hand, dipping deep into the inkwell of false sincerity. To his father he writes, "I have done wrong. I have sinned against you as a king and a father, begging for the mercy of his beloved papa." To his mother he writes with even more sycophantic flair, kissing her feet and proclaiming himself her repentant son. It is utterly shameless and utterly effective. The king officially pardons his son. The family puts on a show of reconciliation. The co-conspirators are put on a show trial where, thanks to the immense pressure from Ferdinand's popular supporters, they are acquitted, though the king exiles them from court anyway. The whole sordid affair is swept under the rug. The conspiracy of El Escorial is over. It was a failure, a fiasco, an amateur hour plot that fell apart at the first sign of pressure. But for Ferdinand, it was the most important political lesson of his life. He had been caught red-handed in an act of treason. He had betrayed his allies and grovelled for his life. And what were the consequences? Nothing. In fact, he came out of it more popular than ever before. He was no longer just a prince. He was a political symbol, the focus of all opposition to the government. He had discovered that the love of the common people was a shield, a weapon more powerful than any secret decree or noble conspiracy. He now understood that he didn't need to win over the court. He needed to win over the street. And as he sits in his chambers, officially forgiven but still simmering with the same old hatreds, he knows his next move will not be a secret plot, whispered in the dark. It will be a roar, a public spectacle, a storm he will unleash upon his parents and their hated favourite. He has tasted treason and found that the public at least has an appetite for it. Only a few months have passed since the embarrassing failure of the El Escorial plot. It is now March of 1808, and the political air has grown so tense it feels like it might spontaneously combust. You are no longer in the granite fortress of El Escorial, but in the softer, more elegant surroundings of the royal palace of Aranjuez, a springtime residence with sprawling gardens just south of Madrid. The royal court has moved here, but this is no vacation. It's a retreat born of fear. Napoleon's troops, under the command of his dashing brother-in-law Marshal Murat, are no longer just passing through Spain. They have become a menacing presence camped on the outskirts of the capital. No one knows what Napoleon's true intentions are, and the uncertainty is breeding a nationwide panic. Into this panic, a single terrifying rumor is dropped like a match into a barrel of gunpowder. Godoy is planning to evacuate the royal family. The word on the street is that he intends to move them south to Seville, and from there to the American colonies, abandoning Spain entirely to the French. It's a repeat of what happened to the Portuguese royal family, who had recently fled to Brazil. To the Spanish people, this is the ultimate betrayal. The idea of their king and court running away, leaving them to face Napoleon alone, is unthinkable, a national humiliation. This rumor, whether wholly true or brilliantly exaggerated, becomes the single focus of the nation's anxiety. And who do you think is standing by with a bellows fanning the flames of this rumor? For all they are worth, Prince Ferdinand and his supporters, of course. Having learned his lesson at El Escorial, that popular opinion is his sharpest weapon, he now wields it with surgical precision. His agents, the nobles and clerics who form his shadow court, move through the town of Aranjuez, whispering in taverns, spreading pamphlets, talking to the palace guards and servants. The message is simple and effective. Godoy is a traitor who is about to sell you out to the French and steal your king. Ferdinand is the only one who cares about Spain. He has promised he will not abandon you. He is your only hope. It's a masterful piece of propaganda, turning Ferdinand into a patriotic icon and Godoy into the embodiment of treason. You can feel the pressure building with each passing hour. The town of Aranjuez is swollen with people, local peasants, disgruntled soldiers, and a network of agitators brought in from Madrid. They are all drawn to the palace surrounding it like a rising tide. They are watching every carriage that comes and goes, convinced it might be the beginning of the royal escape. Inside the palace walls, the court is paralyzed with indecision. King Charles, old and tired, just wants peace. Queen Maria Louisa is frantic, torn between her trust in Godoy and the mounting evidence of a popular uprising. And Godoy himself, the Prince of the Peace, seems to realize for the first time that he has completely lost control of the situation. He is no longer the puppet master. He is the puppet about to have his strings cut. The night of March 17th arrives dark and restless. You are in the main square now, a churning sea of anxious, angry faces lit by torches. The crowd is a mix of ordinary people caught up in the panic and Ferdinand's loyalists who are there to direct the chaos. All they need is a spark. It comes in the form of a manufactured incident, a staged fight, a mysterious gunshot. It doesn't matter what. It's the signal. A great roar goes up from the crowd, and the tide of humanity surges forward. But it doesn't move toward the royal palace itself. Its target is the residence of Manuel Godoy. The mutiny of Aranjuez has begun. You are swept along with the mob as it smashes through the gates of Godoy's mansion. The scene is one of pure destructive fury. People who have felt powerless for decades are now taking their revenge on the symbols of Godoy's wealth. They shatter priceless vases/paintings and throw expensive furniture out of windows. They are not just looting, they are performing an act of symbolic cleansing, trying to erase the presence of the man they hate. They scream his name, searching for him in every room, their voices echoing through the grand ruined house. A modern security consultant would have a heart attack. But Godoy is gone. Just as the mob broke in, he managed to escape to the attic, where you can now picture him, the most powerful man in Spain, burrowing into hiding. And here we have one of history's more bizarre and slightly comical details of a political downfall. Godoy, the Prince of the Peace, spends the next 36 hours hidden in the attic, rolled up inside a straw floor mat. Imagine the indignity. One day you are practically the king of a global empire, and the next you are hiding from your own people, listening to them destroy your home with nothing but a dusty rug for protection. While the hunt for Godoy is underway, Prince Ferdinand plays his part to perfection. He appears on a balcony of the royal palace, looking calm and princely. He speaks to the crowd not with anger, but with a reassuring authority. He tells them he will not leave, that he will stay with his people. He is the image of stability in the midst of the chaos he helped create. He is both the arsonist and the firefighter, a role he will perfect throughout his career. For a day and a half, the strange stalemate continues. The mob controls the grounds, Godoy remains hidden, and the royal family are prisoners in their own palace. Finally, on the morning of March 19th, thirst becomes a more pressing enemy than the mob. Godoy, parched and desperate, unrolls himself from his rug and tries to sneak out. He is spotted instantly. The cry goes up and he is seized. The crowd descends on him, and they are not in a forgiving mood. They begin to beat him, tear at his clothes and drag him through the street. They are about to kill him right there. This is the moment Ferdinand has been waiting for. With a great show of magnanimity, he intervenes. Royal guards push through the crowd and rescue Godoy, who is now a bleeding, terrified wreck. Ferdinand saves his life, but at a price. He goes to his father, the king, and delivers the ultimatum. The people demand justice. To save Godoy and restore order, Charles must strip him of all his titles and powers immediately. King Charles, seeing his favourite about to be torn to pieces, has no choice. He agrees. Godoy is formally dismissed and placed under arrest for his own protection. But Ferdinand and his mob are not finished. Removing Godoy was only the first step. The crowd, expertly guided by Ferdinand's agents, doesn't disperse. The pressure on the palace remains immense. The message is clear. The problem wasn't just Godoy, it was the entire system that allowed him to flourish. The problem was the weak king himself. You can imagine the scene inside the king's chambers. Charles is exhausted, terrified, and utterly broken. His best friend is in prison. His wife is hysterical, his people hate him, and his own son is orchestrating the rebellion. Historians still argue whether what happened next was a calculated abdication or a direct brutal coercion. Was Charles so worn down by the stress that he gave up willingly? Or did Ferdinand, in a private conversation, make it clear that he could no longer guarantee his father's safety or his mother's if he refused to step down? Whatever was said, the result was the same. Later that day, on March 19, 1808, King Charles IV signed the document. He abdicated the throne of Spain in favor of his very dear son. It's over. Ferdinand has won. The sullen, paranoid boy you saw being manipulated by his tutor has now successfully manipulated an entire popular movement to commit a form of dynastic regicide. He has overthrown his own father. The next day, you see him enter Madrid, no longer just a prince, but as King Ferdinand VII. The city explodes in celebration. The people are ecstatic. They unhitch the horses from his carriage and pull it through the streets themselves. They scream his name, "Viva Fernando!" They call him El Deseado, the Desired One. He is the hero who saved them from a tyrant, the patriot king who stood up to the French. He has everything he ever wanted, the crown, the power, and the adoration of the people. As he smiles and waves from his carriage, basking in the pure, intoxicating sunlight of his victory, you might notice something he doesn't. On the hills overlooking the city, the soldiers of the French army are watching the parade. Their commander, Marshal Murat, observes the jubilant crowds with a cool, professional eye. And hundreds of miles away in Paris, the Emperor Napoleon smiles when he hears the news. The Spanish Bourbons have done his work for him. The family has imploded just as he'd hoped. Ferdinand may think he is the king, but he is about to find out he is just another pawn in a much, much larger game. You are standing in the Plaza Mayor in Madrid, swept up in the euphoria. It is late March 1808. The man in the carriage, Ferdinand VII, is the center of a universe of adoration. The people are cheering themselves hoarse for El Deseado, the Desired One. He has saved them, they believe, from the hated Godoy and the despised French. He is the symbol of a renewed, purely Spanish Spain. Ferdinand soaks it all in his chest, swelling with a pride he has never known. He has played the game and won the ultimate prize. The only problem is the man who owns the casino, Napoleon Bonaparte, hasn't finished dealing the cards. Ferdinand's first days as king are a strange mix of popular triumph and political impotence. He sets up his government, appointing his old conspirator friends to high office. His tutor, Escóiquiz, is now his most powerful advisor, a man convinced of his own genius. They issue decrees and hold court, but it all has the feel of a dress rehearsal.
The real power in Madrid isn't sitting in the royal palace. It's quartered with the French troops just outside the city. Their commander, Marshal Murat, is a swaggering, handsome cavalryman, and he holds all the real cards. When Ferdinand makes his grand entry into Madrid, Murat is conspicuously absent. When Ferdinand sends him official notice of his accession, Murat gives a polite but non-committal reply. He refuses to officially recognize Ferdinand as King of Spain. This is a major problem. For Ferdinand's government to be legitimate, it needs the recognition of the other great powers of Europe, and at this moment, there is only one great power that matters: Napoleonic France. The new king's entire foreign policy, the entire focus of his government, quickly boils down to a single obsessive goal: get Napoleon to say, "Yes, you are the king." Ferdinand is like a nervous teenager hoping the coolest, most dangerous kid in school will acknowledge his existence. He dispatches envoys to Paris. He writes fawning, sycophantic letters to the emperor, a skill you'll remember he honed while begging his parents for forgiveness. He assures Napoleon of his undying friendship and his desire to be France's most loyal ally. He even brings up his old idea of marrying a Bonaparte princess, convinced this will seal the deal. It is frankly pathetic. Ferdinand, who rose to power on a wave of anti-French sentiment, is now desperately trying to win the French emperor's approval. His advisors, especially Escóiquiz, are convinced that Ferdinand's charm and the justice of his cause will win Napoleon over. They have fatally misunderstood the man they are dealing with. They see him as another monarch who can be negotiated with. They don't see him as the shark he is circling the bleeding Spanish whale. While Ferdinand is desperately trying to get a thumbs up from Paris, Marshal Murat is expertly playing the situation in Madrid. On Napoleon's secret instructions, he is a one-man chaos engine. He treats Ferdinand with a chilly formality that undermines his authority at every turn. At the same time, he makes friendly overtures to the deposed King Charles and Queen Maria Louisa. He listens sympathetically as they complain that their son forced the abdication out of them, that it was illegal, that they are the true rulers of Spain. Charles, prodded by the furious Maria Louisa, writes a letter to Napoleon formally protesting the abdication and placing his fate in the emperor's hands. Napoleon now has exactly what he wants: two rival kings, each claiming the same throne, and both of them begging for his intervention. It's a geopolitical checkmate, and Ferdinand doesn't even see the board. Then Napoleon dangles the bait. He sends one of his most persuasive envoys, General Savary, to Madrid with a message. The emperor, he says, holds no ill will toward Ferdinand. He is even now traveling south toward the Spanish border. He would be very pleased to meet the new king in person to sort everything out. A face-to-face meeting is the only way to clear up any misunderstandings and cement the glorious new friendship between Spain and France. It's the invitation Ferdinand has been praying for. His ego blinds him to the danger. He believes he can reason with Napoleon, that he can present his case and win the emperor over with his sheer kingliness.
Escouquiz tells him it is a stroke of genius, a diplomatic triumph. So the journey begins. In early April, Ferdinand leaves his adoring crowds in Madrid and travels north to meet the emperor. The plan is to meet in Burgos. You travel with his entourage, and the mood is deeply uneasy. As they ride, a strange fact emerges as a quirky tragic footnote to this whole affair, while Ferdinand is bouncing along in his carriage, dreaming of a French bride, and imperial recognition. Napoleon has already written a memorandum to his own officials outlining his final decision. The House of Bourbon, he has written, must cease to reign in Spain. He has already decided to remove them all. The entire journey you are on is a complete and utter sham. When the royal party arrives in Burgos, Napoleon isn't there. New instructions arrive. The emperor has been delayed. He will meet Ferdinand a little further north in the city of Vitoria. A few of Ferdinand's advisors start to get a very bad feeling about this. They are moving further and further from the capital and closer to the French border. But Escouquiz and Ferdinand press on deaf to the warnings. They arrive in Vitoria, a city in the Basque country, just a stone's throw from France. And again, Napoleon is not there. Here in Vitoria, the sense of dread becomes overwhelming. The people of the city turn out in the streets, but they are not cheering. They are pleading. They beg Ferdinand not to go any further. They physically block the roads, crying out that it is a trap. One of his most loyal and steadfast old courtiers, the Duke of Mahon, makes a final desperate appeal, physically placing himself in front of the king's carriage and warning him that if he crosses the nearby Bidassoa River into France, he will lose his crown and his freedom. This is the moment of truth. Every instinct should be screaming, "Danger!" Historians still argue whether Ferdinand's next decision was born of pure arrogant self-confidence or sheer terrified desperation. Did he truly believe he was clever enough to outmaneuver the master of Europe? Or did he feel so trapped, so certain that defiance would mean an immediate war he couldn't win, that he felt walking into the snare was his only option? We'll never know for sure. What we do know is that General Savary, Napoleon's envoy, makes one final, irresistible promise. He personally guarantees that if the king will just come a little further to the French town of Bayonne, the emperor will recognize him without delay. It's enough. Ferdinand ignores the cries of his people, pushes aside the advice of his wisest counselors, and gives the order to proceed. You watch as the royal carriage clatters over the bridge, leaving Spain behind. The moment the wheels touch French soil, the trap is sprung. The honor guard that meets him feels less like a welcome and more like an escort of prisoners. He arrives in Bayonne on April 20th. There is no triumphant reception. The emperor does not come out to greet him. He is shown to a modest residence, not the chateau where Napoleon is staying. The welcome is cold, formal, and deeply insulting. Ferdinand waits, his stomach surely churning with the first real pangs of fear. Later that day, Napoleon pays him a brief, almost casual visit. The conversation is short and meaningless. The emperor is civil, but his eyes are like chips of ice. The promise of recognition, the whole purpose of this humiliating journey, is not even mentioned. The dread deepens. Ferdinand is now completely isolated, a king without a kingdom, surrounded by French troops, a guest who cannot leave. He is a fly in a spider's web. And that evening, as he looks out his window, he sees the final horrifying confirmation of his mistake. Another set of carriages is rattling into Bayonne. He sees them emerge, old and weary. It's his father, Charles IV. It's his mother, the formidable Maria Louisa. And even their disgraced favorite Manuel Godoy has been brought here. Napoleon, the great director, has assembled his entire cast of dysfunctional characters. Ferdinand finally understands. He has not been invited to Bayonne for a diplomatic summit. He has been summoned for a forced kangaroo family court,
and the judge, jury, and executioner is Napoleon Bonaparte. The game is over, and he has lost. The trap you saw being sprung at the end of the last section now slams shut with a brutal, humiliating finality. You are in a drawing room in Bayonne, and you are about to witness what must be the most dysfunctional and catastrophic family meeting in the history of royalty. Napoleon, the quiet stage manager, has brought all the players together: Ferdinand, the son who stole a crown; Charles, the father who wants it back; and Maria Louisa, the mother and queen, who seems to loathe her own child. The air is thick with years of resentment, and Napoleon simply has to light the fuse.
He lets them argue, and it is ugly. All the forced politeness of court life is stripped away, revealing the raw, venomous hatred underneath. You hear Maria Louisa turn on Ferdinand, her voice shaking with fury. She accuses him of treason, of cruelty, of plotting against them his entire life. Some accounts claim she even screamed that he had no right to the throne because he was not the king's son. A shocking admission, or perhaps just the most wounding insult a mother could hurl. Charles IV, roused from his usual lethargy, calls his son a traitor and demands the crown be returned to him immediately. Ferdinand, sullen and trapped, tries to defend himself, but he is hopelessly outmaneuvered. It's a complete meltdown, a royal family self-destructing for the entertainment of their captor. A reality television producer would weep with joy. While this royal screaming match is happening, news arrives from Madrid that changes everything.
On the 2nd of May, the Dos de Mayo, the people of the capital, enraged by the sight of French troops trying to remove the last members of the royal family, have risen up in a spontaneous bloody rebellion. It's a day of savage street fighting of citizens with knives against soldiers with muskets and cannons. It is crushed brutally by Marshal Murat. The next day, the French execute hundreds of suspected rebels. This news is Napoleon's trump card. He confronts the squabbling royals, his voice like cold steel. He tells them this bloodshed is their fault. Their family drama has set Spain on fire. He declares that they are all incompetent, that the House of Bourbon is no longer fit to rule. Terrified and broken, they fold one by one. On May the 6th, under immense pressure, Ferdinand signs a document relinquishing the crown he held for less than 2 months, handing it back to his father. He does this, he claims, to prevent a civil war and save his people from further violence.
A noble sentiment, if you could believe a word of it.
Then Charles IV, who had already secretly agreed to his part in the charade, completes the transaction. He takes the crown from his son's hand, and in a separate treaty formally cedes the throne of Spain and the Indies to his dear friend, the Emperor Napoleon. Just like that, the entire Spanish Empire has been signed away. Napoleon now possesses the crown, which he promptly bestows upon his older brother, Joseph Bonaparte. The whole sordid episode will go down in history as the abdications of Bayonne. Ferdinand is no longer a king, not even a king in waiting. He is a prisoner. But you will not find him in a cold, dark dungeon. Napoleon has something else in mind. You now travel with Ferdinand and his small entourage, including his younger brother Don Carlos and his uncle, to their new home. It is the magnificent Château de Valençay, a fairy tale castle of elegant towers and sprawling parks in the heart of France.
This is not a prison, it's a gilded cage. The chateau belongs to Napoleon's foreign minister, the legendarily cunning and cynical Talleyrand, who is now tasked with being the royal jailer. Napoleon's instructions to Talleyrand were quite specific and revealing. He was to treat the Spanish princes well, keep them secure, and as a quirky aside to provide them with entertainment, even suggesting he bring some actresses to the castle. The emperor's plan was simple: keep them comfortable, distracted, and politically neutered. And so Ferdinand's long, strange exile begins. For the next 6 years, while his country is torn apart by the most brutal war in its history, His life becomes a gentle, predictable routine of utter pointlessness. You watch his days unfold. He wakes late, he attends mass, he takes long walks in the beautiful gardens. He goes hunting and fishing in the chateau's extensive grounds. He eats multi-course meals prepared by the finest French chefs. In the evenings, he plays cards, listens to music, or works on his embroidery. It's not a joke. Ferdinand became a surprisingly accomplished embroiderer, meticulously stitching elaborate designs, a testament to the sheer mind-numbing boredom of his existence. He is a model prisoner. He makes no attempt to escape. He does not try to contact the resistance in Spain. He expresses no anger at his captor. On the contrary, here in the quiet of his luxurious prison, the most shameful and revealing chapter of his life unfolds not in deeds, but in words. He begins to write letters to Napoleon. You've seen him write groveling letters before to his parents, but these reach a level of sycophancy that is almost breathtaking. He repeatedly addresses the emperor as his protector. He writes to congratulate Napoleon on his victories, victories of French armies over Spanish armies, victories that result in the deaths of thousands of his own countrymen who are fighting in his name. He wishes the emperor a happy feast day. He practically begs to be adopted as Napoleon's son. "My greatest desire," he writes in one letter, "is to be the adopted son of His Majesty, the Emperor, our sovereign." Let that sink in. The man known in Spain as El Deseado, the symbol of national resistance, is secretly trying to become the son of the very tyrant his people are fighting against. Historians still argue whether this was a deeply cynical but clever survival strategy, placating his captor by pretending to be a harmless fool, or if it was a genuine reflection of his utterly amoral character. Was he a brilliant actor playing a long game, or just a pathetic coward with no loyalty to anyone but himself? Given his past and future behavior, it is hard to give him the benefit of the doubt. And now, for the most important part of this story, you must leave the peaceful gardens of Valence for a moment. You must travel back to Spain to see the contrast, to understand the depth of Ferdinand's betrayal. While he is learning to perfect his backstitch, Spain is bleeding. The Spanish people, abandoned by their kings, have taken up the fight themselves. This is the birth of guerrilla warfare, the Little War. Peasants, priests, and nobles form small bands that ambush French patrols, disrupt supply lines, and carry out ruthless acts of sabotage. The French respond with equal brutality, executing partisans and burning villages. It is a war of atrocities, a nightmare of violence. You see the citizens of cities like Zaragoza and Girona enduring horrific sieges, fighting block by block, starving to death in the ruins rather than surrendering. You see the armies of Spain, later joined by the British under the Duke of Wellington, fighting pitched battles against Napoleon's finest marshals. And everywhere you go, you hear one name, one rallying cry: "Viva Fernando!" They are fighting for him. They have created a mythic figure, a noble, suffering king who is a prisoner of the French monster. They carry banners with his face on them. They name their guerrilla bands after him. They endure torture and death in the name of a man who is at that very moment congratulating their executioner on his latest victory. The disconnect between the myth and the reality is a chasm as wide and deep as the Atlantic. He is their martyr king, and he is spending his afternoon fishing in a pond, hoping Napoleon thinks well of him. Back at Valence, the years drift by. Ferdinand grows plump on French cuisine. He becomes a master at billiards. He asks Talleyrand for more books for a better piano. He is a kept man, utterly disconnected from the epic struggle that will define his era. He is a political ghost haunting a beautiful castle, while his name has become a sacred cause for millions. He hears of the great battles Talavera, Salamanca, Vitoria as distant rumors, events that barely impinge on his comfortable world. His people are buying his eventual freedom with their blood, and he is repaying them with fawning letters to their oppressor. He is not just waiting out the war, he is actively collaborating with the enemy, at least in spirit. The gilded cage has not just imprisoned his body, it seems to have completely hollowed out his soul. You must now leave the stultifying, predictable comfort of the Château de Valençay. Leave Ferdinand to his billiards and his embroidery, to his pathetic fan letters to his jailer. While he has been floating in a state of suspended animation, his kingdom has been undergoing a political Big Bang. In the vacuum created by his absence, a new Spain is struggling to be born. With the Bourbon monarchy effectively decapitated at Bayonne and the French King Joseph Bonaparte viewed as an illegitimate usurper, a strange and unprecedented situation has unfolded. Who runs the country? The answer, it turns out, is the Spanish people themselves. All across the unoccupied territories from Galicia to Andalusia, local resistance committees known as juntas have sprung up. They are a chaotic mix of local clergy nobles and town merchants, all united by a common goal to resist the French and to govern in the name of their absent king Ferdinand. It's a messy, decentralized grassroots movement, a country trying to reinvent its own nervous system on the fly. Eventually, these local bodies managed to form a rickety central government, the Supreme Central Junta, to coordinate the war effort. But as the war grinds on, it becomes clear that a temporary committee is not enough. The nation needs a legitimate legal foundation. It needs a government. And for that, they decide to convene the Cortes Spain's ancient, almost forgotten parliament. But where can such a parliament possibly meet? Most of Spain is a war zone. Madrid is occupied. The French control the great cities of the north and the central plains. The answer lies at the southernmost tip of the country in the city of Cadiz. You must picture this place, for it is the crucible in which modern Spain will be forged. Cadiz is a city on an island connected to the mainland by only a thin sliver of land. It is a fortress, a major naval base, and a bustling Atlantic port. Besieged by a French army on the landward side, it remains defiantly free, protected, and supplied by the powerful British Royal Navy. You are now walking the narrow, sun-drenched streets of Cadiz in the year 1810. The city is bursting at the seams. It's a pressure cooker of humanity packed with refugees from across Spain, soldiers, British sailors, merchants from across the globe, and a vibrant community of intellectuals, writers, and radical thinkers. The air is alive with the boom of distant French cannons and the salty tang of the sea. But more than that, it's alive with ideas. In the city's cafes and public squares, people are debating everything. What is a nation? What is a king? Where does power truly come from? For the first time in centuries, all the old certainties are up for grabs. Into this superheated environment come the delegates for the Cortes. They are a strange collection of individuals who manage to make the dangerous journey to this besieged city. There are high-ranking churchmen in their robes, whiskered army officers in their uniforms, and soberly dressed lawyers and professors. And as they begin their debates, they quickly split into two fiercely opposed camps. On one side are the serviles, the servile ones, a nickname given to them by their opponents. They are the conservatives, the traditionalists who believe in the old order. For them, the king is absolute chosen by God. Their goal is simply to fight the war and restore Ferdinand to the throne with all his old powers intact. On the other side are the men who will change history, the liberales, the liberals. And here you find a fascinating quirk of political history. This is it. Right here in the debates of the Cortes of Cadiz, the word liberal is used for the very first time in its modern political sense to describe someone who believes in individual rights, limited government, and a written constitution.
Before this, liberal just meant generous or open-minded. These Spanish patriots literally invented a new political vocabulary. The liberals are inspired by the Enlightenment, by the American Revolution, and even cautiously by the early, less bloody ideals of the French Revolution. They see this crisis not just as a war of independence, but as a golden opportunity to remake Spain from the ground up. You take a seat in the gallery of the Oratory of St. Philip Neri, the church where the Cortes holds its sessions. Below you, the debate is raging. The fundamental question is one that shakes the very foundations of Spain. Where does sovereignty lie? A conservative bishop stands to argue that sovereignty rests solely with the person of the king, a sacred authority passed down from God. To question that is to question God himself. Then a young lawyer from Andalusia leaps to his feet, his voice ringing with passion. No, he thunders, sovereignty does not rest with the king, it rests with the nation. The people are the source of all legitimate power. The king is not the master of the people, he is their first servant. This is revolutionary explosive stuff. In the context of deeply traditionalist Catholic Spain, it is the political equivalent of splitting the atom. And the liberals win the argument. Over the next 2 years of intense debate, they hammer out a document, a blueprint for a new nation. It is the political constitution of the Spanish monarchy promulgated on March 19, 1812. Because it was signed on the feast day of Saint Joseph, it quickly gets a nickname. La Pepa Pepe is a nickname for Joseph. This is no mere list of amendments, it is a complete political reinvention. You watch as the principles are laid out. The very first article declares that the Spanish nation is the union of all Spaniards on both sides of the Atlantic, a nod to the colonies. Then comes the bombshell Article 3, sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. The document goes on to establish a constitutional monarchy. The king, and they mean Ferdinand, will still be the head of state, but his power will be strictly limited. He cannot make laws, impose taxes, or declare war without the consent of the elected Cortes. The old system of absolute power is to be abolished. It establishes the separation of powers, an executive, the king and his ministers, a legislature, the Cortes, and a judiciary. It grants freedom of the press and of speech, though with a cautious exception for purely religious matters. And in a truly radical move, it abolishes the dreaded Spanish Inquisition and the feudal privileges of the nobility. This document is one of the most advanced liberal constitutions in the entire world at the time. It is a beacon of hope for reformers everywhere, yet even as it is being written, you can see the potential for future conflict. Historians still argue whether this constitution was a genuine expression of a new Spanish consensus, or merely the idealistic dream of an unrepresentative urban elite huddled in a single port city, completely out of touch with the deeply conservative Catholic and monarchist sentiments of the vast rural majority of Spain. Were they leading a nation, or were they writing a fantasy in a bubble? But the greatest, most tragic irony of all is woven into every single clause of this revolutionary document. The men of Cadiz are doing all of this in the name of Ferdinand VII. They are convinced they are loyal subjects saving the throne for their beloved suffering king. They see the constitution not as a challenge to his authority, but as a gift. They are presenting him with a modern, stable and powerful nation to rule. They have created an idealized image of Ferdinand in their minds, a wise, forward-thinking patriot who will be grateful for their efforts, who will eagerly embrace his new role as a constitutional monarch. Their battle cry is, "For God, Spain and King." They have no idea. They cannot imagine the reality you have seen. The reality of the man in Valence. The man whose mind is a shallow pool of resentment, paranoia, and an unshakable belief in his own divine right to absolute power. They are building a beautiful, intricate modern cage of laws for a beast they imagine to be a dove. The collision is inevitable. As the cannons boom around Cadiz and the delegates sign their names to La Pepa, they are filled with hope for a new dawn. They believe they have saved Spain, but you know better. You know that the man they are saving it for is the one person in the world most certain to destroy everything they have built. The years of Ferdinand's comfortable exile at Valence are finally drawing to a close, not because of anything he has done, but because the world outside his manicured gardens has been turned upside down. The architect of his captivity, Napoleon Bonaparte, is facing his own downfall. The emperor's grand ambition has shattered in the frozen plains of Russia. His catastrophic invasion of 1812 has bled his Grand Armée white, and now all across Europe, the nations he once conquered are rising up against him. In Spain, the endless grinding war of attrition has decisively turned. The combined armies of Spain, Britain, and Portugal, under the command of the Duke of Wellington, are systematically pushing the French forces back toward the Pyrenees. Napoleon is fighting for his empire's life, and the Spanish ulcer, as he called it, is draining resources he desperately needs elsewhere. It is now late 1813.
Napoleon, in a move of pure political pragmatism, decides he needs to cut his losses. He needs to neutralize his southern front to get the British army out of France, and to do that he needs to make peace with Spain. And so he turns to the man he has kept on ice for almost 6 years. He sends for his prisoner Ferdinand. You can imagine the scene. Ferdinand is summoned from his card game or his embroidery frame to meet with Talleyrand. A treaty is proposed, the Treaty of Valence. The terms are simple. Napoleon will recognize Ferdinand as the legitimate king of Spain and release him. In return, Ferdinand must agree to peace a prisoner exchange and, most importantly, to compel the British to leave his country. For Ferdinand, it is the moment he has been patiently waiting for. He, of course, agrees to everything. He has spent years perfecting the art of telling powerful men exactly what they want to hear. The treaty is signed in December. He is free.
In the first months of 1814, you travel with him as he makes his slow, triumphal journey home. He moves south through a France that is itself collapsing, with Allied armies closing in on Paris. As he reaches the Spanish border in March, you can feel an entire nation holding its collective breath. Spain is a country ravaged by war, but it is also a country alive with hope and fractured by ideology. Two utterly opposed visions for the future are now projected onto this one man. First, there are the liberals. These are the men of the Cortes of Cadiz, the architects of the Constitution of 1812. Their government has since moved from Cadiz to Madrid, and they are anxiously awaiting their king. They are nervous, but they are also proud. They have in their minds performed a miracle. They have led the nation through its darkest hour. They have defeated the mighty Napoleon, and they have forged a modern constitutional framework to make Spain strong and free. They have done all this in Ferdinand's name. They see themselves as his most loyal servants. Of course, he will accept the Constitution. How could he not? It would be an act of monstrous ingratitude to reject the very system that has delivered him his kingdom back. They dispatch a delegation to meet him at the border, carrying a pristine copy of the Constitution. Their instructions to him are clear. He is to travel directly to Madrid to swear an oath of loyalty to the nation's new fundamental law. But there is another powerful faction waiting for him as well. These are the serviles, the absolutists. They are the grandees of the old nobility, the powerful bishops and archbishops, the senior army officers, men who see the Constitution of Cadiz as an abomination. To them, it is a blasphemous piece of paper,
a carbon copy of the godless French revolutionary ideals that they have just spent 6 years fighting to expel from Spain. It is an attack on the sacred intertwined pillars of their world, the absolute authority of the altar and the throne. They too send delegations to meet the returning king. They whisper in his ear, urging him to be a real king like his ancestors. They beg him to tear up the impious constitution and restore the proper God-given order of things. They are in effect lobbying him to carry out a coup d'état against his own government. And what of the people? The ordinary, uneducated, war-weary people of Spain? As Ferdinand's carriage crosses the Pyrenees and touches Spanish soil, the popular reaction is nothing short of explosive. It is a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy. The scenes are incredible. Crowds surround his carriage, weeping, cheering, praying. Once again, as they did in Madrid 6 years before, they unhitch the horses and insist on pulling the carriage themselves for miles from one village to the next. He is more than a king. He is a religious icon, a savior who has returned from martyrdom to deliver his people. And in the midst of this ecstatic celebration, you hear a strange and deeply revealing chant rising from the crowd. "Vivan las cadenas," they shout. "Long live our chains." It's one of the most bizarre political slogans of all time, but what it meant was this: we would rather have the familiar chains of a beloved absolute king and the Holy Church than the strange, incomprehensible freedom being offered to us by a bunch of city-dwelling liberal lawyers. It is a raw, emotional rejection of the entire Cadiz project. The people don't want a constitution. They want their king. Through all of this, Ferdinand is a mask of perfect ambiguity. He is a political black hole, absorbing all the hopes and fears of the nation and reflecting nothing back. He smiles his charming, slightly vacuous smile. He waves to the adoring crowds. When the Liberal delegation meets him and presents him with the Constitution, he receives them politely. He listens to their speeches, takes the document, and says he will study it. He makes no promises. When the absolutist generals and bishops meet him, he listens to them with equal gravity. He hears their pleas for a return to the old ways and gives them a knowing look, a subtle nod. He makes no promises. He is a master of the non-committal gesture. He allows every faction to believe that he is their man. This is his great talent. Historians still argue whether he was a methodical genius who knew from the moment he signed the Treaty of Valence that he would destroy the liberal system, or if he was an opportunist, genuinely uncertain of which way to jump. Did he make his decision only after he entered Spain and felt the overwhelming, intoxicating wave of popular and military support for an absolute monarchy? Was he a calculating plotter, or a man who simply saw a parade and decided to get in front of it? One thing is certain: he is in complete control. He ignores the route prescribed by the Liberal government. Instead of proceeding directly to Madrid, he takes a detour, a slow, meandering tour through cities that are strongholds of conservative sentiment. With every mile he travels, his confidence grows. He sees that the army is his. He sees that the church is his. And he sees that the people, the vast majority of them, are his. The liberals in Madrid, he realizes, are a government with no real power base, an officers' corps with no army. Finally, he arrives in the city of Valencia on the Mediterranean coast. This is where he will stop. This is where he will make his stand. He is surrounded by his supporters. General Elio, the Captain General of Valencia, has already declared his loyalty to Ferdinand as an absolute king. Dozens of absolutist members of the Cortes have arrived,
presenting him with a document that will become known as the Manifesto of the Persians, which denounces the constitution and begs him to restore the old monarchy. The entire nation is now watching Valencia. The liberal government in Madrid issues increasingly frantic orders for him to proceed to the capital orders that he cheerfully ignores. The copy of the Constitution of 1812, the product of years of debate of hope of a dream for a new Spain, is in his hands. It is the legal foundation of the state. He has been welcomed home as a hero, a symbol of national unity. All the blood that was shed, all the sacrifices that were made, have led to this single moment of decision in this sunny coastal city. What will the desired one do with the gift his people have forged for him in the fires of war? You are in Valencia. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of orange blossoms and the sea. But beneath that pleasant surface, the city is humming with political electricity. King Ferdinand VII. The desired one has been here for weeks, holding court, receiving delegations, and generally ignoring the increasingly panicked demands from the liberal government in Madrid that he come and swear allegiance to the Constitution. He has felt the pulse of the nation. He has seen the adoring crowds who chanted for their chains. He has listened to the generals who have placed their swords at his feet, and to the bishops who have promised him the blessing of the Almighty if he restores the old order. He holds all the cards and everyone knows it. The time for ambiguity is over. Inside the palace, Ferdinand sits with his closest absolutist advisors. There is no great soul-searching debate. There is no agonizing over the pros and cons. To Ferdinand, the Constitution of 1812 is an insult. It's a document written by a handful of arrogant lawyers and intellectuals who had the audacity to try and put a leash on him, a king anointed by God. It represents everything he learned to hate in his youth: limits on power, merit over birth and foreign ideas. Remember the boy who fumed in the shadow of Godoy, who saw any power not his own as a personal theft? That boy is now a king, and his core beliefs have not changed one bit. The decision is simple. The Constitution must be destroyed. On the 4th of May, 1814, he picks up his pen. The document he signs will become known as the Valencia Decree. It is his first great act as king, and it is an act of spectacular, calculated betrayal. The decree is a masterpiece of political demolition wrapped in the language of paternal love. You can almost hear his smooth, deceptive voice as you read the words. It begins with praise, thanking the Spanish people for their loyalty and their heroic sacrifices during the war. He acknowledges their love for him, their sovereign. It's the spoonful of sugar to make the poison go down. Then comes the venom. He turns his fire on the Cortes of Cadiz. He declares that they were an illegitimate body convened in a manner contrary to the ancient laws of the kingdom. He claims they were composed of a handful of radicals who in his absence stripped him of his sovereignty and imposed their will on a captive nation. He paints them as usurpers, as schemers who took advantage of a crisis to force a revolutionary document upon a traditional, pious people. He condemns the Constitution itself as an imitation of the French model, filled with democratic principles and Jacobin ideas, the very ideas his people had just fought a 6-year war to expel. And then comes the kill shot, the words that will extinguish the dream of a liberal Spain for years to come. He declares the Constitution of 1812 and every single law and decree passed by the Cortes of Cadiz to be null and void, now and forever, as if such acts had never taken place. Just like that, with a stroke of a pen, 6 years of war, revolution and reform are wiped from the slate. The entire liberal project is erased. To add a final cynical twist,
He vaguely promises to convene a traditional Cortes in the future and to protect the liberty and security of his subjects, a hollow promise that he has absolutely no intention of keeping. This decree is not just a press release, it is the starting gun for a coup d'etat. Ferdinand is too cunning to march on Madrid himself. He stays in Valencia, the picture of royal calm, while he dispatches one of his most loyal and reactionary generals, Francisco de Eguía, to do the dirty work. You now travel with Eguia's troops as they march on the capital. They meet no resistance.
The soldiers who are supposed to be garrisoning the city for the liberal government simply step aside or actively join the coup. The liberals have the law on their side, but they have no one willing to fight for it. You are in Madrid on the night of May the 10th. The city is quiet. The members of the Regency, the ministers of the government, the most famous liberal orators from the Cortes, they are all at home, perhaps anxiously reading the latest dispatches, still clinging to a desperate hope that the king will see reason. They are about to get a rude awakening. In the dead of night, Eguia's soldiers spread out across the city. You watch as they bang on the doors of the most powerful men in the country. These men, who just weeks ago were running a government and dreaming of a new golden age for Spain, are dragged from their beds, some not even given time to dress properly.
They are arrested and marched through the dark streets to the city's prisons, to the jeers of small crowds of royalist fanatics. The government of Spain is dismantled in a single night without a single shot being fired. The next morning, the people of Madrid wake up to find the king's absolutist decree posted on every wall. And what is the popular reaction? Do the people rise up to defend the constitution that was created in their name? Far from it. This is perhaps the most tragic and telling part of the story. The popular reaction is one of joy. Crowds pour into the streets to celebrate the downfall of the liberals. You witness a group of men, a mob of ordinary citizens, surrounding the Plaza de la Constitución, where a stone tablet bearing the words of the Constitution has been erected. With hammers and crowbars, they gleefully smash the tablet to pieces, grinding the symbol of their liberty into dust. They form a parade and march through the streets, cheering for the absolute king. The disconnect between the educated liberal elite and the conservative masses is laid bare for all to see. Historians still argue whether this reveals that the liberal project was always a hopeless fantasy, a foreign import with no real roots in Spanish soil, or whether it simply proves the power of a popular king to manipulate a war-weary and uneducated populace. Was the constitution doomed from the start, or did Ferdinand's personal betrayal kill it in its cradle? With the liberals in prison and the capital secured, the stage is set for the king's return. On May the 13th, Ferdinand VII makes his grand entrance into Madrid. The celebration is even more frenzied than his welcome home. This time he is not just the long-lost king, he is the conquering hero who has vanquished the heretics and Freemasons of the Cortes. He is the restorer of tradition, faith, and order. The people see him as the man who has saved Spain from its own government. He rides through the streets, the absolute master of his kingdom, his power now total, unquestioned, and enthusiastically affirmed by the roar of the crowd. The great betrayal is complete. The men who led the nation in its struggle for independence are now branded as traitors. The Constitution, which had been a beacon of hope for reformers across Europe and Latin America, is now a forbidden text. The 6 years of sacrifice, the hundreds of thousands of lives lost in the war against Napoleon, were supposed to have purchased a new modern Spain. Instead, they have purchased the restoration of the same decadent, incompetent, and absolute monarchy that had led Spain into disaster in the first place. Ferdinand sits on the throne in the royal palace, his smile as benign and unreadable as ever. The crowds cheer outside, but inside the lists are being drawn up.
The prisons are being cleared to make room for new occupants. The lights are going out all over Spain, and a long period of darkness. The first of his reigns of terror is about to begin. Section 10. The cheering in the streets of Madrid eventually fades. The parades end, the banners come down, and the people go back to their lives. And in the quiet that follows, the true nature of the regime you have just seen restored to power begins to reveal itself. The period that is now beginning from 1814 to 1820 will be known as the Sexenio Absolutista, the 6-year absolutist rule, and it opens with a wave of political persecution so thorough and so vindictive that it will poison Spanish society for a century. The White Terror has begun. It is not called white for its innocence, but for the white banner of the Bourbon monarchy, a chilling contrast to the red of revolution. The first targets, of course, are the liberals you saw arrested on that dark night in Madrid. These are the men who wrote the Constitution of 1812, the heroes of the resistance, the intellectual fathers of a modern Spain. Their crime, believing that their king would be grateful. You now follow them from their homes into the dark, damp prisons of the restored monarchy. They are subjected to show trials that are a mockery of justice. The evidence is flimsy, the testimonies are coerced, and the verdicts are decided in advance by the king and his circle. Ferdinand takes a keen personal interest in their cases, often reviewing the sentences himself, and more often than not, demanding they be made harsher. His capacity for holding a grudge, it turns out, is truly monumental. The sentences are devastating. Some of the most distinguished men in Spain, poets, scientists, lawyers, economists, are condemned to years of hard labor. You see them being shipped off to the presidios, the nightmarish penal colonies on the coast of North Africa. Imagine a brilliant orator who had debated the nature of sovereignty in the Cortes of Cadiz, now chained to a wall in a sweltering, disease-ridden fortress in Ceuta, his spirit and body slowly broken by misery. Others are sentenced to internal exile, banished to remote, crumbling monasteries or impoverished villages where they are kept under constant surveillance, their talents left to wither and die in obscurity. This isn't just punishment. It's a systematic effort to lobotomize the nation of its best and brightest minds. But the purge does not stop with the famous liberals. It widens to include another group of people, a group known as the afrancesados, or the Frenchified. These were the Spaniards who, for a variety of reasons, had worked with or for the government of Napoleon's brother, King Joseph Bonaparte. This is a complex group. A few were genuine ideological collaborators who believed Joseph's modernizing reforms were better for Spain than the decadent Bourbons. But the vast majority were simply pragmatists, civil servants, judges, professors, doctors and artists who had stayed in their posts to keep the machinery of society from grinding to a halt. They weren't traitors. They were just trying to survive, to keep the universities open and the courts functioning. Ferdinand had initially hinted at a degree of amnesty for these people, but that promise dissolves like mist in the sun. A vicious witch hunt begins. Anyone who ever took a salary from Joseph's government, who attended a reception at his court, or who simply failed to flee from the French, is now suspect. Committees of purification are set up to investigate people's loyalties during the war. Denunciations are encouraged. A neighbor with a grudge or a rival for a job could destroy a person's life with a single anonymous letter. The afrancesados are stripped of their property, their pensions and their positions. Thousands facing poverty and persecution are forced to flee the country they had tried to serve. They flood across the border into the nation they were accused of loving too much, France.
This exodus is a catastrophic brain drain for Spain. Many of the most skilled administrators, engineers, and thinkers are now gone. And among them, you will find one of Spain's greatest artistic geniuses, the painter Francisco Goya. You remember him, the one who painted that brutally honest portrait of Ferdinand's family. Goya had stayed in Madrid during the war, painting his horrific Disasters of War series in private while fulfilling public commissions. Now, in his old age, he finds the repressive, suffocating atmosphere of Ferdinand's Spain unbearable. He eventually goes into self-imposed exile in Bordeaux, France, a quiet personal protest against the darkness that has fallen over his homeland. The king is not content with simply persecuting people. He wants to turn back time, to erase every last trace of the liberal era. One by one, the institutions of the old regime are dusted off and brought back to life. You watch with a sense of disbelief as he issues a decree restoring the Spanish Inquisition. The Holy Office, that terrifying symbol of religious intolerance that the Cortes had abolished, is back in business. Its power is not what it once was. It doesn't have the same flair for public burnings, but its role as a tool for enforcing social and political conformity is revived. It snoops it, censors it, condemns heretical ideas, which now include things like popular sovereignty and freedom of the press. Everywhere you look, Spain is being dragged backward. The feudal land rights of the nobility are restored. The old guilds, with their antiquated and restrictive control over trades, are re-established, strangling economic innovation. Universities are purged of professors with dangerous ideas, and the curriculum is revised to emphasize rote learning and unquestioning piety. It is a state-sponsored campaign against the 18th century, a war on the Enlightenment itself. Historians still argue whether this wave of repression was driven primarily by Ferdinand's own sadistic and vengeful personality, or if he was simply the willing instrument of the powerful reactionary forces that had engineered his return. Was he the evil genius behind the White Terror, meticulously planning his revenge? Or was he a lazy, cruel, but ultimately simple-minded man prodded into action by the powerful church hierarchy and old guard nobles who saw the terror as necessary to secure their own positions? In the end, it hardly matters. Whether architect or instrument, he presided over it all with what appears to be a genuine depraved sense of satisfaction. The result of all this is a palpable atmosphere of fear. You're in a cafe in Madrid, a cafe. Men talk in low voices, their eyes darting around the room. No one is sure who is a spy, who is an informer, the delator. The government encourages denunciations, creating a society where trust has evaporated. Any expression of a liberal opinion, any criticism of the king or the church, any book that is not on the approved list can lead to a knock on the door in the middle of the night. This is the daily reality of the White Terror, a quiet, bureaucratic, soul-crushing system of control that values obedience above all else. Spain has been saved from the chaos of French ideas, and the price is a state of intellectual and political paralysis governed by the dead hand of the past. The king has what he wants, a quiet, compliant kingdom, purged of its most dynamic and challenging minds. He is the absolute master, and his first act has been to cripple the nation he professes to love. With the liberals languishing in prisons and the constitution reduced to rubble, a new order has settled over Spain. The king's power is absolute. The church and the old nobility are restored to their places of honor. On the surface, it looks like a perfect restoration of the 18th century monarchy. You might expect then that the government of Spain would now be in the hands of seasoned dukes, wise bishops, and experienced statesmen drawn from the ranks of the loyal absolutists. You would be wrong, so very, very wrong.
Ferdinand VII has restored the structures of absolute monarchy, but he has no intention of running it in the traditional way. He has a deep, abiding contempt for the very grandees who helped him to power, viewing them as stuffy, pretentious, and worst of all, independent-minded. You must understand, the paranoia you saw him develop as a youth has not been soothed by his victory. It has been magnified. He trusts no one. He sees rivals and schemers everywhere. His official government ministers, whom he appoints and dismisses with bewildering frequency, are little more than window dressing. He treats their formal cabinet meetings as a tedious chore, sitting through their sober discussions with a look of profound boredom on his face. He listens to their advice, reads their reports, and then goes and does the exact opposite. Because the real government of Spain doesn't meet in the formal council chambers. It meets late at night in the king's private apartments in a smoke-filled back room. Welcome to the world of the camarilla. The word camarilla simply means little chamber or closet, and it perfectly captures the claustrophobic, secretive nature of Ferdinand's true inner circle. This is not a formal institution. It's a gang of personal favorites, a bizarre collection of cronies, sycophants, and low-born adventurers who have the king's ear. They are the only people he feels comfortable with, the only ones he truly listens to. They are his real ministers, his drinking buddies, his confidants, and his partners in misruling an empire. It's a government run by gossip, crude jokes, and personal whims, a situation that would give any student of political science a splitting headache. So let's get a backstage pass and meet some of the key players in this surreal little club. First, you have to meet the man nicknamed Chamorro. His real name is Pedro Collado, and his original profession was not statesman or diplomat. He was a water carrier. He was one of the many ordinary people who had shown devotion to Ferdinand during his early struggles, and the king never forgot it. Chamorro is coarse, uneducated, and famous for his vulgar humor. He has no understanding of economics or foreign policy, but he knows how to make the king laugh, and in Ferdinand's court that is a far more valuable skill. You can see him there in the king's private rooms telling a dirty joke while the fate of a colonial governor is being decided in the corner. Then there is the real operator of the group, Antonio Ugarte. If the Camarilla has a chief financial officer, it's him. Ugarte comes from a background of similar obscurity. Some say he was a mule driver, others a petty financial speculator. What he possesses is a genius for corruption. He is the king's private fixer, the master of the backroom deal. Do you want a promotion in the army? A lucrative contract to supply the navy? A favorable legal ruling? You don't go to the official ministry, you go to Ugarte. For the right price, he can whisper in the king's ear and make anything happen. He builds a vast web of patronage and graft that makes a mockery of the formal government. Of course, a court like this needs a master of ceremonies, a social director for the king's less stately appetites. That role falls to the Duke of Aragon. Unlike the others, he is a high-born noble, the captain of the royal bodyguard. But his primary function is not to protect the king's body, but to arrange his nocturnal pleasures. He is the king's chief procurer, a sleazy companion who organizes the private parties and diversions that Ferdinand so enjoys. He is a buffoon and a flatterer whose presence constantly reminds the stiffer, more formal nobility just how little the king respects their codes of conduct. And providing a veneer of spiritual legitimacy to this whole sordid operation is the king's confessor, a reactionary canon named Victor Damian Saez. He is the ideologue of the group, the one who reassures Ferdinand that his tyranny is God's will. He provides the religious justification for the persecution of liberals,
and convinces the king that any concession to modernity is a sin against the Almighty. He is the voice of the most extreme fanatical clericalism, whispering directly into the ear of the state. Imagine how the country is run. During the day, the Minister of War, a respectable old general, might present a detailed, logical plan for reorganizing an army regiment. Ferdinand listens, nods, and dismisses him. That night, Ugarte comes to the king and tells him that a certain wealthy merchant is willing to pay a handsome sum for his unqualified nephew to be made the colonel of that very regiment. Chamorro makes a joke about how funny the old general looks in his wig. The Duke of Alagon mentions a pretty dancer he has lined up for the evening's entertainment. The next morning, the Minister of War receives a royal order signed by the king, appointing the unqualified nephew as colonel. The minister is left bewildered, his careful plans in ruins, with no idea how or why the decision was made. This is the daily reality of governance by Camarilla. Historians still argue whether this bizarre system was a symptom of Ferdinand's psychological damage, a paranoid monarch so distrustful that he could only surround himself with unquestioning dependents, or if it was a calculated and rather shrewd political strategy. By ignoring the formal structures of government and ruling through an unofficial low-born clique, did he cleverly prevent the powerful old noble families from ever building a rival power base? Was he keeping them off balance on purpose, ensuring that all power and all patronage flowed directly and personally from him? Was it a form of madness or a cynical kind of method? Whatever the reason, the consequences for Spain are catastrophic. There is no coherent policy on anything. The state lurches from one decision to another based on the whims of the king and the corrupt advice of his inner circle. The national treasury, already depleted by years of war, is plundered to reward royal favorites. The military, which had fought so heroically against Napoleon, is neglected and demoralized, its leadership positions sold off to the highest bidder. And across the Atlantic, in the vast Spanish colonies, the leaders of the independence movements watch this spectacle of incompetence and corruption in Madrid. They see a government that is both tyrannical in its principles and farcical in its practice. It strengthens their resolve 1,000-fold. They realize they are not fighting a fearsome empire. They are fighting a hollowed-out regime run by a paranoid king and his pet water carrier. The court of Ferdinand VII is not just a reactionary court. It's a profoundly unserious one. It is a place where intellect is distrusted and expertise is ridiculed. The king has recreated the world he always wanted one, where he is surrounded not by people who challenge him, but by people who amuse him and depend on him utterly. He has purged the nation of its thinkers and reformers, and he has chosen to rule with the help of men whose chief qualifications are their loyalty and their lack of a formal education. While the great powers of Europe are grappling with the challenges of a new industrial and political age, Spain is being run like a shabby, corrupt private club, and the results will be devastating. You've seen how Ferdinand runs his kingdom with paranoia, vindictiveness, and the help of a bizarre entourage of unqualified cronies. But an absolute king has another more fundamental duty, one that cannot be delegated to a former water carrier or a corrupt fixer. He must secure the dynasty. He must produce an heir. All the political power he has amassed, all the purges and persecutions he has carried out, are ultimately meaningless if he cannot guarantee a smooth succession. If he dies without a direct descendant, the throne passes to his younger brother, Don Carlos, a man whose rigid, fanatical conservatism makes Ferdinand look like a freewheeling progressive. The stability of the entire Spanish world rests on what happens in the royal bedchamber. And it is here, in this most private of spheres, that we encounter the true lewd spectre of our story, a tale of physical dysfunction, tragedy, and mounting desperation. To understand the problem, we must first rewind the clock a bit back to the years before Napoleon ever set foot in Spain. In 1802, as a young prince still fuming under the shadow of Godoy, Ferdinand was married for the first time. His bride was his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. She was, by all accounts, a formidable young woman, intelligent, cultured, and politically astute, a true granddaughter of the great Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. A promising match on paper. In reality, it was a catastrophe.
Maria Antonia arrived at the Spanish court and was immediately horrified by what she found. She saw her mother-in-law, Maria Luisa, as a scandalous creature, and Godoy as a loathsome usurper. She found her husband Ferdinand to be coarse, sullen, and deeply unattractive. Being no shrinking violet, she made her opinions known. She formed her own rival political faction at court, which only fed Ferdinand's bottomless well of paranoia. Their marriage was a cold, bitter political war, and it was a fruitless one. In 4 years of marriage, there were no children. Maria Antonia suffered 2 miscarriages, and the royal nursery remained empty. It was during this time that the first whispers began, quiet, dangerous rumors about the prince's physical capabilities. Was the fault his? Was there some difficulty? The gossip was cut short in 1806, when Maria Antonia, still only 21, died of tuberculosis. Her supporters, of course, were convinced she had been poisoned by Queen Maria Luisa and Godoy, a rumor that was never proven, but which added another layer of Gothic horror to the family's reputation. Ferdinand was now a widower, his first attempt at fulfilling his dynastic duty a complete and utter failure. Now let's fast forward back to our main timeline. It is 1816. Ferdinand is back on the throne, his power absolute. He is 32 years old, and the need for an heir is more pressing than ever. His brother Don Carlos is waiting in the wings, a grim spectre of ultra-reactionary piety. So the search for a new queen begins. The choice falls upon another family member, because that's just how these things were done. His new bride is to be his own niece, Maria Isabel of Portugal. She is 19 years old, said to be gentle, kind, and pious. In other words, she is chosen to be the exact opposite of the fiery, independent Maria Antonia. She is expected to be a meek and compliant vessel for the royal succession, a walking incubator with a crown. The young queen arrives in Madrid and enters the strange, toxic world of Ferdinand's court. You can imagine her loneliness. Her husband is a brooding, difficult man decades older than her, surrounded by his coarse camarilla. The court is a nest of intrigue. She is a foreigner, isolated and tasked with one overwhelming job. And it is here that the whispers about the king's difficulties resurface louder than ever. And this brings us to the heart of the matter, the physical spectre that may have haunted Ferdinand his entire adult life. This is a delicate subject, but it is central to understanding the man and his reign. For centuries, rumors have persisted that Ferdinand VII suffered from a rare condition, a form of genital macrosomia. To put it plainly, it is whispered that he was anatomically unusual, so much so that the physical consummation of a marriage was an extremely difficult, if not painful, affair. It would have been a state secret of the highest order, a source of profound personal humiliation for a man obsessed with his own power and virility. The king's body was quite literally a matter of state. Historians still argue whether these stories of Ferdinand's physical abnormality are documented medical fact or simply a form of malicious political propaganda, a vicious rumor concocted by his enemies to make him seem grotesque and subhuman. There is no definitive proof, only suggestive accounts and the persistent whispers of centuries. But if it is true, it recasts his personal life as a private tragedy. His boorish behavior, his crudeness, his possible cruelty towards his wives, it all takes on a darker shade. Perhaps the lashing out of a man deeply insecure about his own physical nature. Despite these alleged difficulties, Queen Maria Isabel does become pregnant. In August of 1817, the court holds its breath. A child is born. But it is a daughter, and worse, she is frail. She dies only 4 months later. The court is plunged into mourning, and the dynastic clock starts ticking again, louder than ever. Soon after, however, there is joyous news. The Queen is pregnant again. This time, everyone prays it will be a strong, healthy boy, an heir to secure the throne. The pregnancy progresses, but in the final days it becomes clear something is terribly wrong. On December 26, 1818, the Queen goes into a difficult, agonizing labor. The court physicians hover helpless. She suffers violent convulsions and tragically stops breathing. Believing her to be dead, the doctors prepare to perform a caesarean section to save the child. But as the surgeon makes the first incision, the supposedly dead Queen lets out a horrific scream of pain and then falls back lifeless for good this time. The operation proceeds. They extract the baby, a daughter, but she too is dead. It is a scene of pure butchery and unimaginable horror. Ferdinand is now 34 years old. He has been married twice. Both his wives are dead. His only child lived for just 4 months. The royal nursery is empty, a silent, mocking testament to his failure. In the 7 years since his glorious restoration, he has managed to terrorize his political opponents and turn back the clock on reform, but he has failed at the one task that defines his role as king. The succession crisis is no longer a distant worry. It is an immediate, pressing reality. His brother Don Carlos and his faction, the Apostolicos, are growing stronger. They see the king's empty cradle as a sign from God that their man is the rightful heir. You can feel the desperation mounting in the royal palace. The swaggering absolute monarch, the man who holds the fate of millions in his hands, is in his own private life a failure. His bizarre court run by his cronies cannot help him here. His confessor can offer prayers, but no solutions. The problem is intimate, personal, and profoundly political. The stability of Spain hangs by a thread, and that thread is the life of a childless, twice-widowed king, a man haunted by personal tragedy and perhaps by a cruel secret of his own physical flesh. For 6 years, the dead hand of Ferdinand's absolutism has held Spain in its grip. But a regime built on incompetence, cronyism, and fear is inherently brittle. You've seen the king's personal life marked by failure and his public administration handed over to a bizarre collection of flatterers. Now you will see the consequences. The state is rotting from the inside, and nowhere is the decay more keenly felt than in the institution that is supposed to be the ultimate guarantor of the throne, the army. You must picture the Spanish army in the year 1819. This is not the proud, victorious force that drove out Napoleon. It is a neglected, demoralized, and deeply unhappy organization. Many of its best officers are veterans of the Peninsular War, men who earned their rank on the battlefield, not in the perfumed antechambers of the palace. They are accustomed to a certain meritocracy, and they now find their promotions blocked by useless aristocrats favored by the king's camarilla. Their pay is almost always late if it arrives at all. And more than anything, they feel a profound sense of disillusionment. They fought for the return of a king only to watch him and his cronies ruin the country they had bled to save. This army is a hotbed of conspiracy, a perfect incubator for rebellion. The final straw comes in the form of a grand, ill-conceived military expedition. Across the Atlantic, Spain's American empire is on fire. From Mexico to Argentina, colonies are declaring their independence. Ferdinand is determined to crush these rebellions and reassert Spanish authority. To this end, He orders the assembly of a massive expeditionary force, some 20,000 soldiers in the area around Cadiz. But the whole operation is a logistical nightmare. The troops are stuck for months in squalid camps, ravaged by outbreaks of yellow fever. The ships procured to transport them, a fleet of leaky, rotten vessels purchased from Russia in a notoriously corrupt deal brokered by the Camarilla, are barely seaworthy. The soldiers know it, and they rightly view a posting to this expedition not as a call to glory, but as a one-way ticket to a miserable death, either by disease on the voyage or by a patriot's bullet in the Americas. It is in this sweltering, disease-ridden and mutinous atmosphere that the flame of liberalism, which had been sheltered in secret societies like the Freemasons, is fanned back to life. You are about to meet the man who will hold the torch. His name is Rafael del Riego. He is a major in the Asturian battalion, a veteran of the war against the French, and a passionate, charismatic idealist who is utterly disgusted by the state of his country. On New Year's Day 1820, in the small town of Cabezas de San Juan, he decides to act. You are there on that cold January morning. The soldiers of his battalion are assembled in the town square. Riego draws his sword, and his voice rings out in the quiet air. He speaks of the tyranny that has crushed Spain, of the corrupt government in Madrid, and of the suicidal mission they are being sent on. Then he does the unthinkable. He proclaims his allegiance not to the absolute king, but to the forbidden text, the ghost of a constitution that had been officially erased 6 years earlier. "Viva la Constitución de 1812," he cries. His men roar their approval. They move quickly, arresting the expedition's commanding general and securing the area. The military revolt, the pronunciamiento, has begun. For a moment, it is a glorious, dramatic gesture. But in the weeks that follow, the rebellion seems to fizzle. Riego marches his small army on a desperate, meandering tour through Andalusia, hoping to inspire other garrisons to join him. But the response is muted. The other commanders hesitate, waiting to see which way the wind will blow. The king's loyalist forces begin to close in, and Riego's column of rebels is harassed, worn down by skirmishes and desertions. By early March, his cause seems lost. It looks destined to be remembered as just another failed liberal uprising, a heroic but ultimately futile footnote in the history of the Sexenio Absolutista. But then, just as all hope seems to be fading, a spark from Riego's rebellion lands on dry tinder hundreds of miles away. A garrison in Galicia, in the far northwest corner of Spain, suddenly rises up and proclaims the Constitution. A few days later, the key city of Zaragoza does the same, then Ferrol, then Barcelona. Like a chain reaction, the rebellion that had failed to ignite in the south now explodes across the north and east of the country. The news spreads, emboldening liberals everywhere. The king has lost control of his kingdom. Now you are back in the royal palace in Madrid. The atmosphere is one of pure panic. Ferdinand and his Camarilla are completely out of their depth. Their system of government, so effective at persecuting unarmed intellectuals, is utterly useless against an armed nationwide military revolt. They are like mob bosses trying to figure out how to stop an earthquake. Ferdinand dispatches an army to contain the rebellion, but its commander, seeing the sheer scale of the uprising, begins to waver. The final blow comes in Madrid itself. The people of the capital, who had once cheered for the absolute king and smashed the constitutional tablet, now pour into the streets, demanding the return of that same constitution. The royal garrison, the king's last line of defense, signals that it will not fire on the people. Ferdinand is trapped. The walls are closing in. He is utterly alone. And, as you have seen him do before, whenever he is faced with a genuine threat, whenever his personal safety is on the line, he does not fight. He does not stand on principle. He crumbles. On the evening of March 7th, 1820, to save his throne from the revolution that is about to engulf it, King Ferdinand VII capitulates completely. He issues a manifesto, a document dripping with the most shameless hypocrisy you can imagine. He, the man who declared the Constitution null and void forever, now claims to have been secretly wishing for its return all along, only prevented from restoring it by the deceit of his advisors. And then comes the famous immortal line of cynical surrender: "Marchemos francamente, y yo el primero por la senda constitucional." Let us march frankly, and I the first, along the constitutional path. The news is received with delirious joy. The mobs in Madrid, in a wonderful quirk of historical symmetry, find the broken pieces of the original constitutional stone tablet and begin to reassemble them. The White Terror is over. The triennial liberal, the 3-year liberal rule has begun. The political prisoners are ordered released from their dungeons. The exiles are told they can come home. A new government is to be formed from the very men Ferdinand had branded as traitors. And Ferdinand himself. He is now King Ferdinand VII by the grace of God and the Constitution, a constitutional monarch. He takes a public oath, his hand on the Bible, swearing to uphold the very document he had so famously and viciously destroyed. Historians still argue whether this dramatic turn of events was a true victory for the principles of liberalism, or if it was simply a testament to the utter incompetence and bankruptcy of Ferdinand's absolutist state. Did the system collapse because the idea of liberty was so powerful, or because the tyranny had become so rotten that it fell over at the first serious push? Either way, the result is the same. You are watching Ferdinand take his oath of allegiance. His face is a mask of solemn piety. But you know him better by now. He is not a convert. He is not repentant. He is a cornered animal, a hostage in his own palace. He has been forced to embrace the system he despises, to be served by the men he loathes. And as he swears his sacred oath, you can be certain that in the deepest, most depraved corners of his mind, he is already plotting, scheming, and dreaming of the day he will have his bloody revenge. The revolution has triumphed. The Constitution of 1812 has been reborn from the ashes, and its architects, the liberals, whom Ferdinand had so cruelly persecuted, are now in charge. You must now step inside the royal palace of Madrid and feel the profound, almost whiplash-inducing change in atmosphere. The sleazy, coarse members of the Camarilla have scattered like rats from a sinking ship. The air, once thick with cigar smoke, crude jokes, and corrupt whispers, is now filled with the earnest ideological language of reform, liberty, and national sovereignty. The king is no longer surrounded by sycophants, he is surrounded by his former victims. You watch Ferdinand as he adapts to his new role as a constitutional monarch. It is the performance of a lifetime. He is forced to preside over a government staffed by men he had sentenced to hard labor. He has to greet and shake hands with the very people whose lives he had systematically tried to destroy. He does it all with a mask of sullen, grudging compliance. He attends the opening sessions of the newly elected Cortes. He sits on his throne looking bored and resentful as he listens to hours of passionate debate about legislative reforms. He is a man who believes he is king by the grace of God, now forced to listen to lectures about how he is merely a servant of the nation. The humiliation must be exquisite.
His primary duty now is to sign into law the decrees passed by the Cortes. And you can feel his private agony with every stroke of the pen. He is forced to approve the definitive abolition of the Holy Office of the Inquisition for the second time. He signs the laws that suppress most of the monastic orders, seizing their vast lands for the state. He ratifies decrees that once again eliminate the feudal privileges of the nobility. He is being forced day by day to put his own royal signature on the demolition of the absolutist world he had so brutally reimposed. Each law he signs is a small, bitter taste of defeat. But if you think Ferdinand has simply accepted his fate, you have learned nothing about him. He is playing a double game of breathtaking cynicism. Publicly, he is the reluctant constitutionalist. Privately, he is the heart and soul of the counter-revolution. From his apartments in the palace, he becomes a spider at the center of a vast web of conspiracy. He uses secret couriers to send messages to loyalist generals, reactionary bishops, and absolutist nobles across the country. He encourages them to resist the new government, to organize to prepare. He uses his considerable private fortune to secretly fund the creation of royalist guerrilla groups, particularly in the deeply conservative rural regions of Navarre and Catalonia. These groups, calling themselves Ejércitos de la Fe, or Armies of the Faith, begin to wage a low-level civil war against the liberal state, all with the clandestine blessing and financial backing of the king, who had sworn an oath to defend that very state. Meanwhile, the liberal government he is supposed to be leading is having its own problems. The unity that brought them to power quickly begins to fray. The liberal movement splits into two main factions. A division Ferdinand watches with glee and does everything in his power to exacerbate. On one side are the moderados, the moderates. These are generally the older liberals, the original architects of the 1812 Constitution. Having experienced exile and prison, they are more cautious, more pragmatic. They believe in reform, but they want it to be gradual, and they believe it's necessary to try and work with the king. On the other side are the exaltados, the radicals. These are the younger, more impatient revolutionaries, men like Rafael del Riego himself. They see the moderados as weak and naive. They distrust the king completely, and rightly so, and want to push for more sweeping, rapid reforms, like redistributing land and further curbing the power of the church. This split paralyzes the liberal government, as they spend as much time fighting each other as they do trying to run the country. Ferdinand, a master of sowing discord, plays them off against one another beautifully. He might hint to the moderados that he could work with them if only they would sideline the radicals, then turn around and provoke the exaltados with an act of petty defiance. He also has one very powerful constitutional weapon which he wields like a club, the veto. The 1812 Constitution gave the king a suspensive veto, allowing him to block any piece of legislation for up to 2 years. Ferdinand uses this power constantly. Any reform that is particularly important to the liberals, any law that strikes at the heart of the old order, he vetoes. His justification is always couched in the language of constitutional prudence, but his goal is simple obstruction. He wants to make the liberal government look ineffective and impotent, to grind the gears of reform to a halt and to frustrate the hopes of the people until they turn against their new leaders. It is a masterful, if deeply cynical, strategy of passive aggression. You can feel the king's status as a virtual prisoner grow. The people of Madrid, now whipped into a political frenzy by a free press and dozens of radical debating clubs, watch his every move. At times, the palace is surrounded by angry crowds demanding he approve a vetoed law. You can witness a famous incident like the bottle-smashing riot, where a mob incited by the exaltados rampaged through the city to protest a moderate ministry they felt was too soft on the king.
The public pressure became so intense that Ferdinand was forced to dismiss his chosen ministers and appoint a more radical cabinet. He is a king held hostage not by guards, but by the revolutionary passion he is forced to pretend to endorse. Historians still argue whether the triennial liberal was ultimately destroyed by Ferdinand's relentless sabotage, or if it was an idealistic experiment that was doomed to fail on its own. The liberals were trying to impose a modern, centralized state on a deeply traditional and regional country. They were plagued by their own bitter internal divisions. They failed to solve the nation's catastrophic economic problems.
Was Ferdinand the primary cause of their failure, or was he simply a cynical opportunist who benefited from a collapse that would have happened anyway? As the 3 years of this strange political cohabitation grind on Ferdinand's position becomes increasingly clear. He is not just a reluctant liberal, he is the secret enemy commander living within the government's own headquarters. He has tried obstruction. He has tried funding internal rebellion. But the armies of the faith are not strong enough to defeat the national army, and the liberal government, for all its flaws, refuses to collapse. He is beginning to realize that he cannot overthrow this system from within. His plotting grows more ambitious, his gaze turning beyond the Pyrenees. He needs an external ally, a savior. He needs the other absolute monarchs of Europe to look at the Spanish disease of liberalism and decide to intervene. He is about to turn his secret treason against his own government into an act of international conspiracy. The double game Ferdinand has been playing for 3 years is reaching its endgame. His strategy of internal obstruction and funding royalist guerrillas has failed to topple the liberal government. He is still a king in name, but a prisoner of the constitution in practice. So, with the cunning of a cornered animal, he expands the board. He begins to look beyond the Pyrenees to the great conservative powers of Europe who had defeated Napoleon and now stood guard over the old order. His new plan is as simple as it is treasonous. He will invite a foreign army to invade his own country. To understand this audacious betrayal, you need to understand the political climate of Europe in the early 1820s. The monarchies of the continent are, for lack of a better term, suffering from a collective case of post-traumatic stress disorder. They have just survived a quarter-century of revolutionary chaos and Napoleonic warfare. Their deepest fear is a repeat performance. To prevent this, the great conservative powers Austria, Prussia, Russia, and the newly restored Bourbon monarchy in France have formed an alliance, sometimes called the Holy Alliance, sometimes the Concert of Europe. Its primary purpose is to act as a continental fire brigade, rushing to extinguish the flames of liberalism or nationalism wherever they might spark. The guiding mind of this reactionary system is the Austrian Chancellor, Prince Clemens von Metternich, a man who viewed constitutional government with the same horror a doctor might view a plague bacillus. And in the eyes of Metternich and his fellow autocrats, Spain is patient zero. The Spanish Revolution of 1820 and the restoration of the godless Constitution of 1812 are not just an internal Spanish affair, they are a contagion. The Spanish disease, as they called it, was already spreading. Inspired by Rafael del Riego's success, liberal revolutions had erupted in Portugal, in Naples, and in Piedmont. The autocrats of Europe watched in horror, convinced that if they didn't kill the Spanish virus at its source, the whole continent would soon be consumed by a fever of constitutionalism. This is the audience for Ferdinand's desperate secret pleas. You are now a fly on the wall in the king's private study in Madrid. You watch as he drafts clandestine letters and gives hushed instructions to secret envoys. These men are tasked with slipping out of Spain and making their way to the great capitals of Europe, Paris, Vienna, St. Petersburg. They carry messages that constitute the highest form of treason. You've seen Ferdinand write fawning letters to a foreign master before when he was a prisoner at Valence, begging to be Napoleon's adopted son. He is now deploying the same skill, but this time he is not a prisoner. He is a king, actively plotting the invasion of the nation he is sworn to protect. You intercept one of these messages. The language is a carefully crafted mix of pitiable victimhood and apocalyptic warning. Ferdinand paints a lurid picture of a Spain on the brink of total collapse. He claims the liberal government is a chaotic rabble of atheists and Jacobins who have unleashed anarchy upon the kingdom. He describes himself as a helpless prisoner in his own palace, fearing daily for his life and the lives of his family, a wild exaggeration. He presents himself as a martyr to the sacred cause of monarchy, abandoned to the revolutionary mob. And then comes the explicit request. He begs his royal brothers to send an army, a powerful international force, to march into Spain, crush the constitutional government, and liberate him from his own people. These secret pleas culminate in a grand diplomatic showdown in the autumn of 1822. The great powers gather for a summit in northern Italy, the Congress of Verona. Officially, they are there to discuss issues like the slave trade and Italian politics. But everyone knows the real item on the agenda is Spain. You are in the room amidst the rustle of silk and the clinking of champagne glasses, because a quirky fact of old-world diplomacy is that the most brutal political decisions were often made in the context of the most lavish balls and banquets. The debate over Spain is intense. The British delegation, led by the Duke of Wellington, is firmly opposed to intervention. As a constitutional monarchy themselves, and with a keen eye for maintaining a balance of power, they argue that the internal politics of Spain are its own business. Forcibly restoring a tyrant would be wrong and would likely lead to another long, bloody war. But the British are a lonely voice of dissent. Austria's Metternich and Russia's Tsar Alexander I are convinced that the Spanish cancer must be surgically removed for the health of Europe. The decisive voice, however, belongs to France. The restored Bourbon King Louis XVIII is under immense pressure from the ultra-royalist faction at his own court. They are itching for a war. They see an invasion of Spain as a perfect opportunity to achieve several goals at once. It would allow the French army to win a glorious victory, burying the shame of its Napoleonic defeats. It would definitively crush the spirit of revolution at home and abroad, and it would restore French prestige and influence in Madrid. For them, a crusade to save a fellow Bourbon king is an irresistible proposition. Historians still argue whether the intervention was truly a matter of high-minded ideology or just cynical geopolitics. Were the members of the Holy Alliance genuinely terrified of a revolutionary pandemic spreading from Spain? Or were they simply using the principle of monarchical solidarity as a convenient excuse to pursue their own national interests in France's case, reasserting its dominance over its southern neighbour? Was this a noble crusade to restore order, or a gangsterish move to put a troublesome country back in its place? In the end, ideology and interest aligned perfectly. Over the strenuous objections of Great Britain, the Congress of Verona gives its blessing. France is officially authorized by the conservative powers of Europe to raise an army and invade Spain. The secret pleas of King Ferdinand VII have been answered. His betrayal is now complete and has been ratified by the crowned heads of Europe. Back in Madrid, the liberal government is aware of the threat. They know an invasion is likely, but they are divided on how to respond and hopelessly outmatched militarily. And in the royal palace, Ferdinand plays his part to perfection. He pretends to be a patriotic Spaniard,
publicly denouncing the threat of foreign intervention while secretly counting the days until his liberators arrive. He has sold out his country. He has invited a foreign army to attack Spanish cities and kill Spanish soldiers. All of it just to get his own absolute power back. A massive French army is now gathering on the border, preparing to cross the mountains. Ferdinand's revenge is coming, and it will march under the white flag of the French Bourbons. The decision has been made in the glittering ballrooms of Verona. The secret pleas of the traitor king have been answered. You are now standing on the misty banks of the Bidassoa River, the natural border between France and Spain, in the early morning of April the 7th, 1823. On the far side of the river, a vast army is stirring. This is the force that has come to crush the Spanish Revolution. They have been given a grand, almost medieval name, dripping with crusading propaganda, the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis. In reality, it's a modern, well-equipped and professional French army of about 95,000 men, but the name is all about marketing the invasion as a holy quest. Their commander is the Duke of Angoulême, the nephew of the French King Louis XIX, a man who is a true believer in the cause of absolute monarchy. As the French columns begin to cross the river and march onto Spanish soil, everyone, the French, the Spanish liberals, the watching world, expects the next few years to be a bloody repeat of the Peninsular War. They are expecting a whole nation to rise up in patriotic fury, for every mountain pass to be an ambush, for every village to be a fortress. They are expecting the nightmare of guerrilla warfare all over again. They could not have been more wrong. You march with the French army and the experience is surreal. Instead of a hail of bullets from partisan fighters, they are greeted with a shower of flowers. In the conservative Basque country and Navarre, the French are not seen as invaders. They are hailed as liberators. The armies of the faith, those royalist guerrilla bands that Ferdinand had been secretly funding, now emerge from the hills and join the French as allies. Priests lead their parishes out to greet the soldiers holding crucifixes and banners of the Virgin Mary. The invasion quickly turns into a triumphal procession. The French advance is so swift and meets with so little resistance that it feels less like a war and more like a very large, heavily armed parade. Why was there no great national resistance this time? The liberal government in Madrid had made too many enemies. Their anti-clerical policies had enraged the powerful church and the pious peasantry. Their attempts to create a modern centralized state had alienated the regions that clung fiercely to their ancient local privileges. And the government itself was, as you know, bitterly divided. The Spanish army, which should have been the nation's shield, was fractured. Some units fought bravely for the Constitution, but many more, disillusioned and led by conservative officers, simply defected to the invaders or melted away. The fierce unifying patriotism of 1808, forged in the fire of Napoleon's treachery, was gone. As the French columns sweep down from the north with alarming speed, the liberal government in Madrid is forced to make a desperate choice. They cannot hold the capital. They decide to retreat south to regroup and to take their most valuable asset and their most dangerous prisoner with them. They are taking the king. You are part of the sad, frantic convoy that flees Madrid. It's a caravan of ministers, deputies and their families carrying state papers and what's left of the national treasury, all of them escorting a king who is secretly praying for their downfall and the victory of the approaching army. Ferdinand, of course, plays the part of the aggrieved captive protesting his removal from his beloved capital. But you can imagine the deep, malicious joy he must be feeling. The government retreats first to Seville in the heart of Andalusia, but the French are relentless, their advance almost unopposed.
Knowing they cannot hold Seville, either the liberals decide to fall back to the one place in Spain that had never surrendered to a French army, the place where their movement was born, the island fortress of Cadiz. But here they hit a snag. Ferdinand, seeing his French saviors getting closer, decides to engage in some passive resistance. He refuses to go. He claims his conscience and his gout will not allow him to travel any further. The Cortes is faced with an absurd dilemma. Their king, their hostage, is refusing to be saved. In a move that perfectly captures the bizarre tragicomic nature of this whole affair, the Cortes meets in emergency session and votes to temporarily declare the king mentally incompetent, invoking a clause in the constitution. Having officially declared him insane, they are now legally empowered to force his removal to Cadiz for his own safety. It's a constitutional fig leaf to cover the raw reality that they are now simply kidnapping their own head of state. And so the final act of the Trienio Liberal will take place in its birthplace. You are now inside the besieged city of Cadiz. The French army surrounds it by land and the French navy blockades it by sea. The situation is hopeless. The liberals are trapped with a hostile king in their midst and with no chance of relief. The siege does not last long. On August the 31st, the French launch a surprise amphibious assault on the fortress of Trocadero, a key defensive point guarding the bay. The battle is a swift and decisive French victory, a triumph that will be commemorated for years to come. There is still a Trocadero Square in Paris today named for this battle. With the fall of Trocadero, the defense of Cadiz becomes impossible. The liberal dream is over. Their only remaining card to play is the king himself. They enter into negotiations with the Duke of Angoulême. The French demand the unconditional release of Ferdinand. The Spanish liberals agree, but on one condition. They beg the king to issue a decree promising a general amnesty, a full pardon for everyone involved in the constitutional government. They want his royal word that there will be no reprisals, no purges, no revenge. Ferdinand, with the French army just across the bay, is in a generous mood. Of course, he tells them. He promises to be a benevolent father to all his people. He signs a decree filled with promises of forgiveness, a total and complete forgetting of the past. It's exactly what they want to hear. Historians still argue whether the effortless French victory was a damning verdict on the Spanish liberal project, proving it had no popular support, or if it was simply a demonstration of a grim geopolitical reality of the 1820s, that no single nation could sustain a liberal revolution against the unified reactionary might of the Holy Alliance. Was Spain defeated by itself or by Europe? The final scene takes place on October 1st, 1823. You are standing on the shore of the Bay of Cadiz near the French headquarters. You watch as a small boat makes its way across the water from the island city. In it sits King Ferdinand VII. As he steps onto the mainland, he is greeted as a hero by the Duke of Angoulême and a crowd of cheering Spanish royalists. He is free. He is no longer a constitutional king. He is once again the absolute monarch. And the very first thing he does within moments of setting foot on liberated soil is to declare that the amnesty decree he had just signed was null and void because it had been extracted from him under duress. The mask is off. The time for feigned compliance is over. The promises made to the men who held him captive are worthless. The time for a second and far more terrible vengeance has arrived. The boat carrying King Ferdinand VII touches the shore. He steps onto the mainland, a free man, his kingdom handed back to him on the bayonets of a French army. His liberal captors had extracted from him a solemn written promise of amnesty and forgiveness. You watch his face as he is greeted by the Duke of Angoulême. There is no relief, no magnanimity. There is only the cold, hard glint of triumph. His very first act within moments of his liberation is to issue a new decree nullifying the one he had just signed.
The promise of amnesty, he declares, was made under duress and is therefore meaningless. It is his most definitive and immediate betrayal yet. The mask of the constitutional monarch is not just removed, it is smashed on the ground. The period that is about to begin will be known to history as the Decada Ominosa, the ominous decade, and its dawn will be drenched in blood. The wave of repression that follows is even more vicious, more sweeping, and more cruel than the White Terror of 1814. The first one was a purge. This one is an extermination. The king's thirst for vengeance, having been bottled up for 3 years, is now unleashed with terrifying force. The French, who had seen themselves as noble crusaders restoring order, are shocked by the sheer vindictiveness of the king they have just liberated. The Duke of Angoulême pleads with Ferdinand for moderation, but his advice is ignored. This is a Spanish affair now, a settling of accounts. A hunt begins for anyone and everyone associated with the Trienio Liberal. The prisons emptied in 1820 are quickly filled to overflowing. But this time, the king is not just interested in imprisonment and exile, he wants executions. He wants to make an example of the men who dared to defy him. To carry out this purge, new instruments of terror are created. So-called commissions of purification are established in every government office, every university, every town council, and every regiment of the army. Their job is to root out anyone with liberal sympathies. It is a national witch hunt. Careers are destroyed, families are ruined, and entire institutions are gutted of their most competent people to be replaced by loyal but often useless absolutist fanatics. And to enforce this new order on the streets, a new paramilitary force is created, the Voluntarios Realistas, or Royalist Volunteers. You see them now marching through the towns and villages. They are a civilian militia drawn from the most fanatically conservative elements of society. They are the king's private army, more loyal to him than the regular military and often more extreme. They act as a political police force, intimidating the populace, spying on their neighbors and carrying out arrests, often with a brutality that even the official authorities find shocking. The ultimate symbol of this new, harsher terror is the fate of the man who began the liberal revolution, Rafael del Riego. After the collapse of the Constitutional Army, he is captured while trying to flee and is brought to Madrid in chains. You are there for his trial, a legal farce designed not to determine guilt, but to inflict maximum humiliation. He is charged with treason, the hero of 1820, now branded the ultimate traitor. The verdict is, of course, a foregone conclusion. The sentence is death. But Ferdinand does not grant him the honorable death of a soldier by firing squad. The sentence is designed to be the most degrading imaginable. On November 7, 1823, you witness a horrific spectacle in the heart of Madrid. Riego is not allowed to walk to his death. He is placed in a large wicker basket on a cart and dragged by a donkey through the streets like a common plague victim being taken to a pit. The crowd, the same Madrid crowd that had once hailed him as a liberator, now jeers and pelts him with garbage. He is taken to the Plaza de la Cabada, where a towering gallows has been erected. He is hanged, and after his death his body is dismembered, his limbs to be displayed in the cities that had supported his cause. This isn't just an execution. It's a barbaric ritual of political exorcism designed to terrorize anyone who might ever again dream of a constitutional Spain. Riego is the most famous victim, but he is far from the only one. The same fate befalls other heroes of the struggle against Napoleon who had the misfortune of siding with the liberals. You see Juan Martín Díaz, the legendary guerrilla fighter known as El Empecinado, the stubborn one. For his constitutionalist beliefs, he is captured, held for nearly 2 years in a cage for public display, and then executed. The message is clear: no past heroism can save you. Loyalty to the absolute king is the only virtue. Faced with this relentless terror, another great wave of exiles flees Spain. Thousands of the country's most educated citizens, its scientists, its poets, its politicians, its doctors, manage to escape the dragnet. They find refuge in London, in Paris, in the newly independent republics of the Americas. They form a bitter, impoverished and intellectually vibrant community abroad, writing, printing and plotting for the day they might return. The brain drain that began in 1814 now becomes a catastrophic hemorrhage. Historians still argue whether this second, more brutal terror was a meticulously planned policy of extermination directed by Ferdinand himself, or if it was an uncontrollable explosion of grassroots royalist fury that the king simply unleashed and rode to his advantage. Was he the cold, calculating architect of the thousands of executions and imprisonments, or was he a willing accomplice to a popular frenzy of revenge that he couldn't have stopped even if he had wanted to? Whatever the case, the result is the same. The ominous decade has begun, and its name is well earned. The Spain of 1823 is a dark, suffocating and miserable place. It is a nation governed by fear. The universities are silent. The press is muzzled. The economy, already in shambles, continues to stagnate. The government is a dysfunctional mess of purges and paranoia. The king has won his total victory. He has crushed his enemies. He sits on his throne, the undisputed absolute master of a nation that is now intellectually crippled, economically backward, and internationally scorned. But in unleashing the most fanatical elements of his own support base, in sanctioning the terror of the royalist volunteers, he has created a new monster. For these ultra-royalists, the Apostolicos will soon come to believe that even Ferdinand in his supreme tyranny is not quite tyrannical enough. You've witnessed the bloody dawn of the ominous decade. The king's enemies are dead, imprisoned or in exile. The country is held in a grip of fear by fanatical militias and purification committees. Ferdinand VII is once again the undisputed master of Spain. But as he presides over this grim, silent kingdom, a familiar anxiety gnaws at him, a private failure that undermines all his public victories. He is in his late 30s, twice a widower, and he still has no heir. His entire political project, this brutal restoration of absolute monarchy, is built on sand. It has no future beyond his own lifespan. The moment he dies, the crown passes to his brother Don Carlos and the even more extreme faction of Apostolicos that surrounds him. For Ferdinand, this is an intolerable prospect. The search for a third queen begins, and it is a matter of the most urgent state security. After the fiery intelligence of his first wife and the tragic frailty of his second, a new strategy is tried. The royal matchmakers look to the deeply Catholic conservative heart of Germany, to the Kingdom of Saxony. The choice falls upon the Princess Maria Josepha Amalia. When the marriage takes place in October 1819, she is just shy of her 16th birthday. Ferdinand is 35. She is chosen, it seems, for one overwhelming quality, her piety. She had been raised not in a palace, but in a convent on the Elbe River, under the strict supervision of nuns. She is said to be a living saint, a girl whose every waking thought is of God. The hope is that her profound virtue will be rewarded by heaven with a male heir. It is, you have to admit, a unique approach to matchmaking. The young princess arrives in Madrid, a delicate, holy flower dropped into the snake pit of Ferdinand's court. And the result is a culture clash of epic, almost comical proportions. Maria Josepha is completely and utterly unprepared for the reality of marriage. Her convent education had taught her a great deal about prayer and sin, but absolutely nothing about her duties as a wife and queen. This leads to one of the most bizarre and awkward episodes in royal history. On their wedding night, Ferdinand, eager to get on with the business of producing an heir, approached his new bride. But the terrified 16-year-old, who had been taught that any act of the flesh was a mortal sin, apparently reacted with shrieks of horror. She fled from her husband, convinced he was a demon trying to lead her immortal soul to damnation. The marriage remained unconsummated. The situation escalated from a private embarrassment to a full-blown diplomatic crisis. The king's ministers were in a panic. How could they solve a problem that was part theology, part biology? In the end, they resorted to the highest authority they could think of. A desperate plea was sent to the Vatican. And so, you must picture a special papal courier riding hard from Rome to Madrid, carrying not a treaty or a declaration of war, but a personal letter from Pope Pius VII to the young Queen of Spain. In this letter, the Holy Father himself had to gently explain to Maria Josepha that the physical duties of a wife, when performed within the sacrament of marriage for the holy purpose of procreation, were not a sin, but a sacred obligation. It's hard to imagine a more awkward piece of correspondence. Eventually, armed with this divine permission slip, the young queen relented. This spectacularly unpromising start set the tone for the entire marriage. For 10 long years, from 1819 to 1829, Maria Josepha was Ferdinand's queen. This decade spanned the final turbulent year before the Riego Revolt, the entire 3-year experiment of the Triennio Liberal, and the first 6 bloody years of the ominous decade. Through all this political chaos, her presence was a constant, but it was a quiet, almost invisible one. She was a phantom in the palace. She had no interest in politics, no taste for court society, no influence on her husband or his government. Her life was a cloistered routine of endless prayer, quiet charity, and the composition of religious poetry. She was a nun who happened to be married to a king, and most importantly, the marriage was fruitless. Year after year, the royal nursery remained empty. The hopes that had been placed on her piety proved to be in vain. The nation waited, the court waited, and most anxiously of all the factions surrounding Don Carlos, waited. Every year that passed without the announcement of a royal pregnancy was another year closer to their ultimate triumph. Ferdinand was now entering his 40s, an old man by the standards of the day, and his failure to father a child was becoming a national obsession, the great unspoken crisis at the heart of the regime. Historians still argue whether the reasons for this barren union were physical or psychological. Was the Queen suffering from a medical condition that made pregnancy impossible? Was it a continuation of Ferdinand's own rumoured physical difficulties that you've heard about before? Or was it simply that this profoundly mismatched couple, the coarse, cynical middle-aged king and the terrified pious girl, had a relationship so cold and emotionally barren that it was physically fruitless as well? We will never know for sure. You can picture the sad, lonely existence of Maria Josepha. She is surrounded by a court she despises, married to a man she fears, and failing at the one job she was brought to Spain to do. While her husband is signing death warrants and unleashing his secret police on his subjects. She is in the royal chapel on her knees praying for a miracle that will not come. She is a tragic figure, a victim of both Ferdinand's personal dysfunction and the brutal transactional nature of royal dynastic politics. The long, quiet, and deeply unhappy marriage finally came to an end in May of 1829. After a short illness, Queen Maria Josepha, Amalia, died. She was only 25 years old. She left behind her volumes of devotional poetry, a reputation for saintliness, and an empty cradle. For Ferdinand, it was another personal tragedy. But more importantly, it was a political catastrophe. He was now 44 years old, a three-time widower, and still after all these years and all these wives, utterly without an heir. The succession crisis had reached its absolute peak. The supporters of his brother Don Carlos were no longer whispering in corners. They were openly preparing to take power. The king was aging, and it seemed that God, nature, and biology had all conspired against him. He knew he had at most one last chance to roll the dynastic dice. The year is 1829. King Ferdinand VII is 44 years old. His third wife lies in her tomb, and the royal nursery is as silent and empty as it has ever been. For 15 years, he has been the absolute master of Spain, but he has failed to secure his own legacy. And as he ages and his health begins to falter, the shadow that has been patiently waiting in the wings of his court begins to grow longer and darker. It is the shadow of his younger brother, the man who by all existing laws is the undisputed heir to the Spanish throne, the Infante Don Carlos. You must now turn your attention to this man, for he is the key to the final bloody chapter of Ferdinand's story. You see him at court, a stern, unsmiling figure. Where Ferdinand is coarse, cynical, and self-serving, Carlos is austere, formal, and frighteningly sincere. He is a true believer. His piety is not a matter of political convenience, as it often seems with Ferdinand. It is the rigid, unbending core of his entire being. He genuinely believes with every fiber of his soul that kings are chosen by God to rule without question, and that the Catholic Church should be the supreme, unchallenged authority in every aspect of life. For him, absolutism is not a political theory. It is a divine commandment. Any compromise, any hint of modernism, any concession to liberty is a direct insult to God. He is a man without a shred of doubt, and that makes him far more dangerous than his cynical, pragmatic brother. As Ferdinand's failure to produce an heir has become more and more pronounced over the years, a powerful political faction has formed around Don Carlos. They are known as the Apostolicos, or the Ultras, the ultra-royalists. These are the hardliners, the fanatics, the people for whom the ominous decade is not a brutal repression, but a step in the right direction that simply didn't go far enough. This group is a coalition of the disgruntled and the devout archbishops who dream of restoring the full, terrifying power of the Inquisition. Veterans of the royalist guerrilla bands who feel they haven't been properly rewarded, and deeply conservative peasants from regions like Navarre, Catalonia, and the Basque country who fear that any form of modern centralized government will destroy their ancient local customs and laws, their fueros. And this leads you to witness one of the most profound and delicious ironies in all of history. Ferdinand VII, the man who twice betrayed the Constitution, who restored absolutism, who oversaw the White Terror, who had Rafael del Riego dragged to the gallows in a basket, is now viewed by this powerful and growing faction of his own supporters as being too soft, too weak, too moderate. In the eyes of the Apostolicos, Ferdinand has become a dangerous liberal. Why on earth would they think this? You have to look at the world from their extreme paranoid perspective. They are furious that Ferdinand, under some pressure from the French after the 1823 invasion, never restored the Inquisition to its full 16th century glory. They despise his reliance on a somewhat modern, centralized bureaucracy run by pragmatic ministers, some of whom they suspect of being secret Freemasons. They want to return to a more decentralized, almost feudal system where the power of the nobles and the church is absolute. They are, in essence, reactionaries reacting against a reactionary. It's a political snake eating its own tail. They see compromise in every pragmatic decision Ferdinand makes, and they see betrayal in every government minister who isn't a frothing zealot. The tension between the king and this ultra-faction is not just a matter of courtly whispers. It has already exploded into open rebellion. You need only look back a couple of years to 1827 in Catalonia. A massive revolt broke out, the so-called War of the Aggrieved. But this was not a liberal uprising. This was a rebellion by tens of thousands of ultra-royalists fighting under the slogan, "Long live the king down with bad government." They were demanding the extermination of all liberals, the full restoration of the Inquisition, and though they didn't always say it out loud, the replacement of King Ferdinand with his more reliable brother Don Carlos. Ferdinand was forced into the absurd position of having to send his army to brutally crush a rebellion of his own most fervent supporters. It was a clear sign that he was losing control of the very forces of reaction he himself had unleashed. So you can feel the atmosphere in the palace. It is thick with suspicion. The court is now effectively divided into two camps. On one side are the Ferdinandists, the pragmatists who support the king. On the other are the Carlists, the Apostolicos who look to his brother as their true leader. Don Carlos himself plays his part with quiet cunning. Publicly, he is the model of a loyal brother and subject. He is always respectful, always correct in his behavior. He makes no overt moves against the king, but he does absolutely nothing to discourage his followers. He accepts their adoration, listens to their grievances, and simply waits. He is a silent, brooding rebuke to his brother's reign, a constant reminder that there is a purer, more extreme form of absolutism waiting in the wings. Historians still argue whether Don Carlos was truly the passive, pious figurehead. He appeared to be a man swept along by a movement he didn't create, or if he was a deeply ambitious and politically astute operator who was actively cultivating his base and preparing to seize power. Was he a holy icon for the movement, or its secret driving force? Was he an unwitting pawn, or a cunning player? One thing is certain, the stage is now perfectly set for a civil war. It is no longer a question of liberals versus absolutists. The liberals have been crushed. The new fault line is within absolutism itself, between the pragmatic, cynical tyranny of Ferdinand and the fanatical, ideological tyranny represented by Carlos. The entire state that Ferdinand has built through decades of plotting betrayal and bloodshed is now threatened not by his enemies, but by his supposed friends. He knows that the moment he closes his eyes for the last time, his brother will inherit the throne and the Carlists will take over, purging the government of anyone loyal to Ferdinand's memory. His own legacy is on the line, and he knows with the cold certainty of a man running out of time that there is only one thing in the world that can stop this from happening: a child. His child. Section 20. The death of his third queen has left Ferdinand VII in the most desperate position of his life. He is 44 in declining health, and the wolves are circling. The faction supporting his brother Don Carlos the Apostolicos can almost taste power. They see the king's string of dead wives and empty nurseries as a clear sign from God that Carlos is the chosen successor. Ferdinand, a man who has spent his entire life obsessed with securing his own absolute authority, now faces the ultimate humiliation, the prospect of his entire legacy being handed over to a group of fanatics who consider him a dangerous moderate. He knows he has one last desperate chance to cheat fate. He must marry, and he must marry immediately. This time, there is no room for error. The search for a fourth wife is a frantic, pragmatic affair. She must be young, she must be healthy, and above all, she must come from a family with a proven track record of fertility. The choice once again falls within the tangled family tree of the Bourbons. The candidate is another of his nieces, the 23-year-old Neapolitan princess Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies. She is the full package young from a famously fertile line and by all accounts beautiful and charming. A formal proposal is made and the arrangements are concluded with a speed that tells you everything you need to know about the urgency of the situation. In late 1829, Maria Cristina arrives in Spain and the grim moribund court of the ominous decade is hit by a lightning bolt of life and energy. Anyone expecting another pious retiring victim like Maria Josefa is in for a profound shock. You see her now, stepping from her carriage. She's not a frightened girl raised in a convent. She is a sophisticated, vivacious, and supremely confident young woman. She is charming, intelligent, loves music and dancing, and possesses a sharp, intuitive understanding of court politics. She is, in short, everything Ferdinand's previous wives were not. The effect on the aging, sullen king is immediate and transformative. You watch as this vivacious young woman completely captivates him. He is utterly besotted. For the first time in his life, Ferdinand appears to be in a genuinely happy, affectionate marriage. He dotes on his new bride, showers her with gifts, and most importantly, he listens to her. She in turn proves to be a masterful manager of his difficult personality. She knows how to soothe his paranoid suspicions, how to flatter his ego, and how to gently guide him without ever appearing to challenge his authority. After 3 failed and tragic unions, the king has finally found a partner. Their wedding in December 1829 is a lavish affair, a burst of colour and light in the grey landscape of the ominous decade. But it is much more than a royal marriage. It is a political earthquake. The arrival of a young, healthy and charming queen throws the entire succession crisis into a new light. Maria Cristina instantly becomes the gravitational centre for a new political faction at court. All the more pragmatic ministers, the moderate absolutists, the career bureaucrats who are terrified of a Carlist takeover now see a glimmer of hope. They rally around the new queen, seeing her as their only chance to prevent the kingdom from falling into the hands of the Apostolikos. She is no passive bystander. She understands her role perfectly and quietly begins to build her own network of support, a court of Cristinos, to counter the court of the Carlists. And what is the reaction from the other side? Pure, unadulterated fury. For Don Carlos and his supporters, the arrival of Maria Cristina is a catastrophe. For years they had been the undisputed heirs, patiently waiting for the old king to die. Now, their ambitions are threatened by this frivolous foreign girl. Their response is to launch a vicious and deeply personal propaganda campaign against the new queen. You can almost hear the whispers they spread through the churches and taverns. They brand her a secret liberal, a Freemason sent to corrupt the king and destroy the true faith. They mock her love of parties and fashion as proof of her decadence. They spread nasty rumors about her character, her intentions, her very being. The more extreme Apostolikos see her as a kind of Jezebel, a wicked woman sent by the devil to cheat their holy prince Don Carlos of his God-given inheritance. But Ferdinand, for once, is immune to the poison. He is too enchanted by his new wife to listen to the mutterings of the zealots. And then only a few months into the marriage comes the news that electrifies the court and throws the entire kingdom into a state of suspended animation. The queen is pregnant. The announcement changes everything. The succession is no longer a theoretical question to be decided upon the king's death. It is an immediate biological race against time. The entire political landscape of Spain now realigns itself around the Queen's pregnancy. The Cristinos are overjoyed, praying daily for a healthy baby boy who will solve all their problems. The Carlists are plunged into a state of desperate rage, praying just as fervently for a miscarriage or failing that for the child to be a girl. Historians still argue whether Maria Christina's influence on Ferdinand represented a genuine political shift toward moderation, or if it was simply a pragmatic alignment of interests. Was she a closet reformer who hoped to gently liberalize the regime? Or was she a clear-eyed political operator who knew that the only way to secure her own power and that of her future child was to build an alliance with the enemies of her rival Don Carlos? Was her charm a tool for reform or a weapon of pure self-preservation? Whatever her motives, her impact is undeniable. She has broken the political paralysis of the court and forced a confrontation that has been simmering for years. As she grows heavier with child, the tension in the palace becomes almost unbearable. The two factions watch each other like wolves, engaging in a silent, vicious war of intrigue. Every rumor is magnified, every gesture is analyzed. The fate of the Spanish Empire, the legacy of a disastrous king, the question of whether the future holds a brutal civil war, it has all been reduced to the fragile, invisible flutter of a heartbeat inside the Queen's womb. The final act of Ferdinand's reign is about to begin, and it will be decided not in a battle or a council chamber, but in the royal birthing room. The news of Queen Maria Christina's pregnancy has sent a shockwave through the court. For the king's supporters, it is a moment of delirious hope. For the followers of Don Carlos, it is a moment of pure dread. But both sides know that the celebration and the dread are premature. There is a 50% chance that the child will be a girl, and according to the law of the land, as it has been understood for over a century, a girl is dynastically useless. As long as Ferdinand's brother Don Carlos is alive, a daughter cannot inherit the throne. Ferdinand, the absolute monarch, finds himself in the intolerable position of being at the mercy of pure biological chance. And he is not a man who likes to leave things to chance. To understand the audacious move he is about to make, you need a brief lesson in the tangled history of the Spanish laws of succession. For most of its history, the ancient kingdom of Castile had allowed women to rule. The great Queen Isabella I, Columbus's patron, is the most famous example. The crown could pass to a daughter if she had no brothers. But when the French Bourbon dynasty took the Spanish throne in the early 1700s, they brought their own customs with them. King Philip V introduced a version of the French Salic law which completely barred women from the throne. Later, this was softened into what is known as the Semi-Salic law. This law stated that a woman could inherit, but only after every single male in the entire Bourbon dynasty, right down to the most obscure, distant Italian cousin, was dead. In practice, it meant no woman would ever rule. This is the law that makes Don Carlos the undisputed heir. But Ferdinand, the master of the backroom plot, has one last stunning card to play. It is a secret, a legal time bomb that has been sitting dormant in the state archives for 40 years. You must now travel back for a moment to the year 1789. Ferdinand's father, the well-meaning but weak Charles IV, was on the throne. At the request of the king, the Cortes met in secret session and passed a law. This law abolished the semi-Salic rule and formally restored the ancient traditional Castilian order of succession where a daughter could inherit if she had no brothers. It was a major decision. But then, for a complex set of political reasons, mostly fear of angering the other Bourbon monarchies in France and Naples, Charles IV never got around to formally publishing the law. He ordered it sealed and filed away.
It was a loaded gun hidden in a drawer and then forgotten. Until now. It is March 29th, 1830. Queen Maria Christina is several months pregnant.
You are in the room as King Ferdinand VII, flanked by his wife and his most loyal ministers, makes his most fateful decision. He orders the publication of a royal decree that will go down in history as the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830. He is not, he claims, creating a new law. He is simply ordering the formal promulgation, the official activation of the secret law his father had passed way back in 1789. It is an act of breathtaking political audacity, cloaked in the dry, legalistic language of filial duty. He is merely fulfilling his dear father's final wish, he says. The fact that this wish just happens to disinherit his hated brother and secure the throne for his own unborn child is of course a complete coincidence. The moment the Pragmatic Sanction is published, the kingdom explodes. It is a declaration of war against Don Carlos and his followers. The Carlists are apoplectic with rage. They immediately declare the sanction to be an illegal fraud, a forgery, a despicable plot hatched by the manipulative foreign queen and her cabal of secret liberals. They argue that a law that was kept secret for 40 years has no legal validity. They claim that Ferdinand has no right to change the fundamental laws of succession to suit his own selfish needs. For them, Don Carlos's right to the throne is not a matter of law, but a matter of divine will. And you do not rewrite the will of God. A war of pamphlets and propaganda erupts, with each side hiring lawyers and historians to scour the archives for precedents that support their case. It's a bitter academic feud that is the prelude to a real bloody conflict. This act also causes a massive political realignment. In order to defend his decision and the rights of his unborn heir, Ferdinand now needs allies. And where can he find them? Not among the ultra-royalists, who have now become his mortal enemies. He is forced by sheer necessity to turn to the very people he has spent his life persecuting. He needs the support of the pragmatic bureaucrats, the moderate royalists, and even as a last resort, the surviving liberals. All those who fear a Carlist takeover more than they dislike Ferdinand now rally to the cause of the pregnant queen. The king who built his career on being the champion of reaction is now forced to become the protector of a relatively more moderate path. His daughter, if he has one, will have to reign with the support of the liberals. It is a supreme irony. The personal confrontation is not long in coming. You can imagine the scene in the palace. Ferdinand summons his brother Don Carlos to a private audience. The air is thick with a lifetime of resentment. The king demands that his brother publicly swear an oath to recognize the Pragmatic Sanction and to accept the unborn child as the legitimate heir, regardless of its sex. Don Carlos stands before his brother, his face a mask of rigid piety. He refuses. He tells the king that his rights do not come from the law, they come from God, and he cannot and will not renounce what God has given him. The family feud that has been simmering for decades has now become an open, irreparable breach. There is no going back. Historians still argue whether this whole scheme was Ferdinand's own long-meditated plan, a secret weapon he always knew he possessed, or if it was a desperate last-minute gamble cooked up and pushed on him by his intelligent and politically savvy new wife, Maria Christina. Was he the master strategist? Or was he following the lead of a queen who was already securing her own future as a potential queen regent? Whatever the source of the plan, its effect is clear. The king has thrown a grenade into the heart of the Spanish monarchy. He has rewritten the rules of the game to favor himself. But a law on a piece of paper is one thing. Enforcing it is another. The Carlists have made it abundantly clear that they will never, under any circumstances, accept this act. They will see it as a declaration of war. The entire nation is now poised waiting. The bells that will ring out from the palace to announce the birth of a child will not just signal a new life. They will signal the start of a countdown to a brutal and inevitable civil war. The pragmatic sanction has been published. The king's will is now the law of the land, at least on paper. But a law is only an opinion until it is tested by reality. All of Ferdinand's legal maneuvering, all of his political realignments, all of it is a house of cards resting on one simple biological outcome. And so you find yourself waiting along with the entire Spanish nation through the long, hot summer of 1830. The court is paralyzed by anticipation. The Queen's pregnancy is the only topic of conversation, the only political issue that matters. The two factions that have crystallized around the succession, the Cristinos supporters of the Queen and the Carlist supporters of the King's brother, spend these months in a state of feverish anxiety. The Carlists, in their desperation, launch a vicious whispering campaign. They insist the pregnancy is a hoax, a phantom pregnancy, staged by the wicked Queen using pillows and padding a fraud designed to cheat their noble prince of his birthright. They predict that a stillborn baby will be produced, or that the Queen will try to pass off a commoner's child as her own. The Cristinos, for their part, organize lavish public prayers for the health of the Queen and the safe delivery of a healthy and preferably male heir. The political tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, the waiting is over. It is October the 10th, 1830. You are now inside the royal birthing chamber in the royal palace of Madrid. And you must understand a royal birth in this era is not a private family affair. It is a formal public political event. The room is crowded. In accordance with ancient tradition, the Minister of Justice and other high-ranking officials of the court are required to be present as official witnesses. This strange and rather intrusive custom was designed for exactly this kind of situation, to prevent any accusations of fraud, to ensure no one could claim the baby was switched at birth. They are there to verify, with their own eyes, the reality and the sex of the child that emerges. Queen Maria Christina's labor is long and difficult. The hours drag on. The King Ferdinand waits outside, pacing a storm of emotions churning within him. He is a man who has controlled the destiny of an empire through sheer ruthless willpower. But in this, he is completely powerless. Finally, a cry is heard from within the chamber. A baby's cry. A healthy, living child has been born. The witnesses lean in, the royal physician makes the examination, and then the formal announcement that will seal the fate of Spain for the next 50 years. It is an infanta, a girl. In the antechamber, the news is brought to the king. A daughter. After 3 wives, 4 decades of waiting, and a lifetime of personal and political turmoil, Ferdinand VII is a father. By all accounts, his reaction is one of pure, unadulterated joy. This cynical, cruel, and manipulative man is overwhelmed by a simple human emotion. He rushes to see his child. He holds her, dotes on her, and gives her the name of the great 15th century queen who unified Spain, Isabella. In this moment, she is not a political symbol to him. She is his daughter, the miracle he had long since given up hope for. But outside the warm glow of the nursery, the news hits the political world like a thunderclap. A girl. This single fact means that Ferdinand's great gamble, the pragmatic sanction, is no longer a theoretical legal document. It is now the only thing that makes his beloved daughter the heir to the throne. Without it, she would be just another princess, and Don Carlos would still be the successor. The birth of Isabella makes the enforcement of the pragmatic sanction a political necessity. The reaction from the two factions is immediate and absolute. The Cristinos, the supporters of the Queen, are ecstatic.
A girl is not the ideal outcome. A boy would have ended the argument for good, but she is an heir. The law is on their side. They now have a living, breathing symbol to rally around the infant princess of Asturias, who will one day be Queen Isabella II. They waste no time in cementing her position, beginning the elaborate legal process of having the traditional courtiers formally swear allegiance to her as the rightful heir. The Carlists, on the other hand, are plunged into a state of cold, quiet fury. Their worst fears have been realized. Their last great hope that the child would be a boy and thus not challenge Carlos's claim directly under Salic law has been dashed. From the moment of her birth, they refuse to recognize Isabella as the heir. To them, she is an usurper. Their propaganda machine, already in high gear, now redoubles its efforts. They insist the pragmatic sanction is an illegal sham and that Isabella's claim is therefore fraudulent. They argue that the ancient laws of the kingdom cannot be changed by the whim of a doting old king and his manipulative foreign wife. In their eyes, the true and legitimate heir to the throne remains Don Carlos. Historians still argue whether a compromise was ever possible at this moment. Could Ferdinand and Maria Cristina have offered to betroth the infant Isabella to the eldest son of Don Carlos? Such a marriage would have in a generation united the two rival claims and perhaps averted a civil war. Was such a solution ever seriously considered, or were the ideological divisions between the moderate Cristinos and the fanatical Carlists already so deep and so bitter that no such compromise could ever have held? We will never know. What is certain is that the birth of this one tiny baby has solidified the battle lines for a future war. The conflict is no longer a theoretical argument over dusty legal texts. It now has faces. It is the cause of the infant Isabella versus the cause of her uncle Don Carlos. You cannot have two rival claimants to an absolute throne. One must prevail and the other must be destroyed. You can see the infant princess now asleep in her magnificent cradle, swaddled in silks and lace. She is the object of her father's adoration, the symbol of her mother's political triumph. She is the hope of the moderates and the liberals who see her as their shield against the terror of a Carlist regime. But this child born to secure a dynasty has instead been born to ignite a war. Her very existence is a challenge, an insult to a powerful faction that believes her to be illegitimate. Every breath she takes is a step closer to a conflict that will tear her country apart. The cradle, meant to be a symbol of peace and continuity, has become the crucible of a civil war. The infant Isabella is the recognized heir to the Spanish throne. The pragmatic sanction is the law of the land. It seems that Ferdinand in his final years has won his long and bitter dynastic struggle against his brother. But this victory is incredibly fragile. It rests entirely on the life of one man, the king himself. And the king is not a well man. Years of indulgent living and the chronic agonizing pain of gout have taken their toll. His health is the single most important political barometer in Spain, and everyone is watching it with a morbid intensity. The Cristinos pray for him to live long enough for his daughter's claim to solidify. The Carlists pray for the opposite. In the late summer of 1832, the crisis that everyone has been dreading arrives. The royal court has moved to the beautiful summer palace of La Granja de San Ildefonso, a sort of miniature Versailles nestled in the cool mountains outside Madrid. Here Ferdinand suffers a catastrophic attack of gout. He falls gravely ill, lapsing in and out of consciousness until he finally slips into a deep coma. The royal physicians gather around his bed, shake their heads, and deliver their grim verdict: the king is dying. His death is not a matter of weeks, but of days, perhaps even hours. The news turns the idyllic summer palace into a hotbed of political intrigue.
You are now standing in the gilded, silent corridors of La Granja, and you can feel the tension. The vultures are gathering. On one side of the chessboard is the Queen Maria Cristina. She is still young, a foreigner, and now utterly terrified. She sits by her husband's bedside, watching him fade, knowing that the moment he dies, she and her 2-year-old daughter Isabella will be at the mercy of their most bitter enemies. On the other side are the Carlists. They have played their hand perfectly. The king's brother Don Carlos is here, and so are his key supporters in the government, most notably the fanatical Minister of Justice, Francisco Tadeo Calamarde. They see their moment, the chance to snatch a final definitive victory. They begin to work on the distraught and politically isolated queen. You can almost hear their soft, menacing whispers in her ear. They paint for her a horrific and probably accurate picture of what will happen if the king dies now. A brutal civil war will erupt between the supporters of Isabella and the supporters of Carlos. The country will be torn apart. Her daughter's claim to the throne will be washed away in a river of blood. She, a foreign queen, will be powerless to stop it. Then they offer her a way out. There is one way and one way only, they say, to save Spain from this catastrophe, to protect her own life and the life of her child. She must persuade the king in his final moments to perform one last act of patriotism. He must revoke the pragmatic sanction. He must restore Don Carlos as the rightful heir. It is a work of masterful, cruel political blackmail, using the threat of a war to achieve their own dynastic ends. Maria Cristina, believing her husband is breathing his last, believing she is acting to save her daughter from a terrible fate, capitulates. A decree is drawn up revoking the pragmatic sanction. Calamarde and the other Carlist ministers bring it to the king's deathbed. Ferdinand is barely conscious, his body failing, his mind clouded. You watch as they place a pen in his hand. His hand is guided as he scrawls a weak, barely legible signature. It is done. The pragmatic sanction is dead. Isabella is no longer the heir. Don Carlos is once again the successor to the Spanish throne. The Carlists have won. They have played the game to the very end and snatched victory from the jaws of death, or rather from the jaws of the king's impending death. But then a miracle, or at least a medical surprise, occurs. The king does not die. The crisis of his illness passes. Over the next few days, against all odds, he begins to recover. The fever recedes. He regains consciousness. He begins to understand what has happened. And as he learns of the decree he was made to sign, of the way his brother's faction used his moment of weakness to bully his wife and steal his daughter's inheritance, he is filled with a cold, clear rage. This is the moment Maria Cristina becomes the true force in Spanish politics. She has seen the ruthless face of the Carlist faction up close, and she knows that any hope of compromise is gone. She has been humiliated and outmaneuvered, and now, with her husband unexpectedly recovering, she launches her counterattack. A quirky and telling anecdote from this moment involves the Queen's fiery younger sister, Luisa Carlota, who had rushed to La Granja upon hearing of the king's illness. When she learned what Minister Calamarde had done, she reportedly sought him out and slapped him across the face with both hands, a stunning breach of court etiquette that perfectly summed up her family's fury. Emboldened by her sister and with her husband's backing, Maria Cristina acts. She convinces Ferdinand that the Carlists are his true enemies and that the only way to secure Isabella's throne is to seek new allies. The king, now fully aware of his brother's treachery, agrees.
In a single decisive move, he dismisses his entire Carlist ministry. Calamard and his colleagues are sent packing in disgrace. In their place, he appoints a new government of moderate reform-minded absolutists, men who are royalists, but who despise the fanaticism of the Carlists. He then has this new government formally declare that the revocation decree he signed on his deathbed is null and void, having been extracted from him while he was not of sound mind. On the last day of 1832, the Pragmatic Sanction is officially reinstated. Isabella is once again the heir. And then Ferdinand takes one last revolutionary step. He knows that the moderate absolutists are not enough to guarantee his daughter's throne. He needs broader support. And so the great tyrant, the man who had spent his life persecuting liberals, issues a royal decree of amnesty. It is a broad pardon, opening the prison doors for thousands of liberals who had been arrested after 1823 and allowing the exiles to finally come home. It is a stunning reversal. Ferdinand is not becoming a liberal, but he is a pragmatist. He is consciously and deliberately building a coalition of moderates and liberals to defend his daughter's cause against the ultras. Historians still argue whether Maria Christina's brilliant counter-coup was motivated by a genuine change of heart, a realization that the future of Spain lay in a more moderate direction, or if it was a cold, calculated move of pure political survival. Was she a secret reformer who seized her chance, or a pragmatist who, having been burned by the Carlists, simply allied herself with their enemies out of self-interest? Whatever her motives, the events of La Granja are a political earthquake. The Carlists have been purged from the government. Don Carlos, seeing that the game is lost, leaves Spain for a self-imposed exile in Portugal, where he begins to plot his inevitable return. And Ferdinand, in the final year of his life, has been forced to dismantle his own life's work. In order to save his own bloodline, the arch-reactionary has had to embrace the forces of moderation and reform. The king is now a fading shadow, but the queen has emerged as the true leader of a new political alliance. The battle lines are now clear, not just in law, but in government. The final countdown has begun. The drama of La Granja is over. The king, having stared death in the face and blinked, has returned to Madrid. But he is a changed man, or rather, he is a broken one. The final year of his life, 1833, is spent as a phantom king, an invalid who rarely leaves his chambers. The gout that has plagued him for decades is now consuming him, leaving him weak, enfeebled, and in constant pain.
You see him now, not as the arrogant tyrant, but as a fading old man, his famous Bourbon jaw slack, his eyes clouded with sickness. The real power in the kingdom has already been transferred. His wife, Queen Maria Cristina, is the effective ruler of Spain. She is the regent in all but name, consolidating her power, purging the last of the Carlists from the army command, and confirming the new alliance with the moderates and amnestied liberals. She is preparing for the storm that she knows will break the moment her husband draws his last breath. The end comes on September the 29th, 1833. You are standing vigil in the hushed halls of the Royal Palace of Madrid. The ministers of state are gathered waiting. The royal physicians come and go, their faces grim. Finally, in the late afternoon, the doors to the king's bedchamber open. A somber official emerges. King Ferdinand VII, the man they called El Deseado, is dead. After a reign of betrayals, terror, and relentless political maneuvering, the great survivor has finally succumbed to the one enemy he could not outwit. The moment of his death is the moment the succession crisis becomes a reality. Everything happens with a swift, grim inevitability. A proclamation is read from the balconies of the palace to the waiting crowds below. The king is dead. Long live the queen. The king's daughter, not yet 3 years old, is officially Queen Isabella II. Her mother, Maria Cristina, is named Queen Regent, the legal ruler of Spain, until her daughter comes of age. The Cristinos have executed the plan perfectly. They hold the capital, the state treasury, and the command of the army. They have the law, the pragmatic sanction on their side. But the law is not recognized everywhere. The news of Ferdinand's death travels by horseback and semaphore tower, reaching his brother Don Carlos in his exile in Portugal. This is the moment he has been preparing for his entire life. He wastes no time. He issues his own formal proclamation, the Manifesto of Abrantes. In it, he declares the pragmatic sanction an illegal act, Isabella, a usurper, and himself, the one true legitimate king of Spain and the Indies by the grace of God as King Carlos V. It is a formal declaration of civil war. That proclamation is the spark, and the Carlist heartlands in the north of Spain are the powder keg. The signal has been given. In the Basque provinces, in Navarre, in the mountains of Catalonia and Aragon, the priests ring the church bells, not for the dead king, but as a call to arms for the new one. You see men leaving their farms and villages, grabbing their old hunting muskets. Local leaders, who have been secretly plotting for months now, declare for King Carlos V. The royalist volunteer militias, the Voluntarios Realistas, that Ferdinand himself had created, overwhelmingly side with the Carlists. The cry of "Viva Carlos V" echoes through the mountain passes. The First Carlist War has begun. This is Ferdinand's ultimate and most enduring legacy. The conflict he has bequeathed to his nation is not a simple war of succession. It is a brutal, fratricidal conflict, a war of two Spains. It's a war that pits city against countryside, the liberal, modernizing urban centers against the deeply traditional rural periphery. It's a war that pits region against region, with the northern provinces fighting to defend their ancient local laws, their fueros against the centralizing ambitions of Madrid. And it's a war of ideologies, a savage clash between the forces of liberalism and the forces of clerical absolutism. You see the cruelty of it immediately. This is not a conflict fought by professional armies in neat lines. It is a civil war which is always the most vicious kind. Neighbors turn against neighbors. Villages are divided. To illustrate the bitterness of the conflict, you need only look at the creation of militias like the Chapel Goris, or Redcaps, Basque liberals, who fought with particular ferocity against their fellow Basques who had joined the Carlist cause. The war will be defined by summary executions, the torture of prisoners, and a level of brutality on both sides that will horrify Europe. It will rage for 7 long years, and by the time it is over, hundreds of thousands of Spaniards will be dead. Historians still argue whether the First Carlist War was at its heart a purely dynastic struggle that simply used ideology as a recruiting tool, or if it was a much deeper conflict between two incompatible visions of Spain that had been brewing for a century. Was the question of Isabella versus Carlos merely the trigger for a conflict that was bound to happen anyway? Was it a war about a succession, or a war about the very soul of a nation? What is undeniable is that Ferdinand's actions made the war inevitable. His entire reign was a masterclass in fostering division. He first crushed the liberals, creating a generation of bitter exiles. Then he nurtured the most extreme elements of absolutism, the apostolikos, only to betray them in his final years. His final act, changing the succession for his daughter, was a purely personal and selfish move aimed at preserving his own bloodline on the throne, with no regard for the catastrophic consequences for his country.
He spent his life trying to secure his own absolute power, and in the end, his obsession with his personal legacy led directly to the destruction of the kingdom's peace. So as Ferdinand's body lies in state in the Escorial Palace, awaiting burial among the kings of Spain, the nation he ruled for so long is already tearing itself apart. The lewd spectre that haunted Spanish history, the mind obsessed with its own power, has finally departed. But the poison it secreted for decades has now seeped deep into the soil of the nation. The ghost of Ferdinand VII will not be exorcised quickly. It will haunt Spain not just for the 7 years of this First War, but for generations to come in a long and tragic cycle of civil conflicts that are all, in a way, the bitter inheritance of the desired one. The king is dead. The war has begun. Our long journey through the toxic landscape of his life is over. And now, as his body is sealed in its marble sarcophagus in the royal crypt of El Escorial, it is time for us to conduct our final examination.
It is time for the autopsy of the depraved mind of Ferdinand VII, to understand the poisons that flowed through him and the ruinous sickness he bequeathed to his nation. So you are with me now in the cold, metaphorical dissection room of history. On the table before us lies not a body, but a reign. And as we begin our work, the first and most striking feature we observe is the profound link between his cowardice and his cruelty. The two traits are inseparable two sides of the same debased coin. Remember, the young prince caught plotting against his father at El Escorial. He did not stand his ground. He wept, he groveled, and he immediately betrayed every single one of his co-conspirators to save himself. Remember him at Bayonne, fawning over Napoleon, begging to be his adopted son, while his people were rising up against the French. Remember him in 1820, faced with Riego's revolt, caving instantly and swearing allegiance to a constitution he despised. In every moment of true personal danger when faced with a superior force, Ferdinand's instinct was always to collapse, to dissemble, to survive at any cost. But when the danger had passed, when he held all the power, this cowardice metastasized into a monstrous cruelty. The brave liberal leaders of 1812 and 1820, the very men who had forged a nation from the ashes of war, were not just imprisoned. They were systematically humiliated, their spirits broken in fetid African jails. The hero Rafael del Riego was not just executed. He was dragged through the streets like refuse and publicly dismembered in a ritual of pure sadism. This is the classic pathology of the bully. His cruelty was never the confident assertion of a strong tyrant. It was the insecure, vicious lashing out of a weak man terrified of those he perceived as his intellectual or moral superiors. He only ever punched down. As we look deeper, we see a mind utterly devoid of principle. His entire life was a testament to duplicity. He betrayed his father to seize the throne. He betrayed his people by collaborating with their enemy Napoleon. He betrayed the liberals of 1812 who had made him their icon. He betrayed his own government during the Trienio Liberal by inviting a foreign invasion. And in his final act, he betrayed the ultra-royalists who had been his most fervent supporters, changing the law of succession to deny their champion his own brother. Ferdinand believed in nothing, not in God, not in country, not in family, except the preservation and expansion of his own personal absolute power. He was a perfect cynic, a political black hole who consumed all the light of loyalty and ideology that came near him, leaving only darkness. This cynicism was fed by a deep-seated paranoia and a profound anti-intellectualism. You saw his bizarre court, his reliance on the Camarilla. He turned his back on the educated nobility and the skilled bureaucrats, choosing instead to surround himself with the likes of a water carrier and a mule driver. He felt comfortable
only with people upon whom he could look down, sycophants whose loyalty was guaranteed because they had nowhere else to go. He purged the universities, celebrated ignorance, and equated education with treason. This was not just a political tactic, it was the core of his being. He feared and hated what he did not understand, and he did not understand the modern world that was being born all around him. And what was the result of this deeply dysfunctional mind being placed at the head of a global empire? The damage is almost incalculable. You see the loss of a continent. While Ferdinand was obsessed with his domestic political battles, the Spanish-American colonies one by one fought for and won their independence. His combination of brutal repression and administrative incompetence was the best possible fuel for the revolutionary fires. He inherited an empire upon which the sun never set, and by the time he died, all that remained were Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and a handful of scattered islands. You see the crippling of a nation's economy and society. At the very moment that Britain and France were entering an age of industrial revolution, Ferdinand was busy restoring feudalism and the medieval guilds. He deliberately drove his nation's most skilled and educated people into exile, a catastrophic brain drain that set Spain back for generations. He left behind a country that was impoverished, stagnant, and profoundly out of step with the rest of Western Europe. But his most toxic legacy, the one that would bleed for more than a century, was the political polarization he perfected. By refusing every opportunity for compromise, by treating politics as a zero-sum game of extermination, he destroyed any possibility of a stable political center. He created the two irreconcilable Spains. Before Ferdinand, there were political disagreements. After Ferdinand, there was only a mortal hatred between the forces of liberalism and reaction. The Carlist wars, which his dynastic scheming directly ignited, were merely the first bloody chapter of a conflict that would define modern Spanish history. The pattern of military intervention in politics, the deep anti-clerical rage of the left, the fanatical religious traditionalism of the right, all of this can be traced back to his disastrous reign. The Spanish Civil War of 1936 was in many ways the last horrific battle of the war that Ferdinand started. And if you seek a visual representation of his era's spirit, you need only look to the haunting, terrifying black paintings that Goya created on the walls of his house during the ominous decade, images of madness, despair, and humanity devouring itself. Historians still argue whether Ferdinand VII was a uniquely terrible monarch who single-handedly derailed his country's history, or if he was simply a tragic symptom of his time, the inevitable product of a collision between the old regime and the forces of modernity in a country ill-prepared for the shock. Was he the disease, or was he just the ugliest of the symptoms? Our autopsy is complete. The final verdict is clear. Ferdinand was not a great tragic villain. He was a small, petty man elevated by birth to a position of immense power. He was a nation wrecker, a lewd spectre of cowardice, cruelty, and cynicism, whose cold touch withered everything he came into contact with. He was given the title El Deseado, the Desired One. It is a final, bitter irony that he would go down in history as one of the most disastrous and despised kings his country has ever had to endure. And so, our long night's journey has come to an end. The story is told, the spectre has been laid to rest, and the sounds of that distant, troubled kingdom can now begin to fade away into the quiet of your room. Let the echoes of cannon fire and the whispers of conspiracy dissolve into the gentle hum of the fan or the soft stillness of the night outside your window. The complex tapestry of Ferdinand's ruinous life can now be folded away, its vivid colors of ambition and betrayal softening into the simple grey tones of a story that is finished. There is nothing more to analyze, no more darkness to explore. There is only the calm that comes after the tale is told, a gentle descent into the peaceful quiet of your own space. Feel the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders, and allow your mind to drift away from the past, letting the soft tide of sleep pull you gently toward the shore of your own dreams.